You're live. Okay. You ready? Good afternoon. Welcome. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, February 16th. I would note that Council Member Atkins and Council Member Goodale are not joining us this evening. Council Members Harper and Sternad are with us electronically, and Council Member Brandt is going to join us a little bit late. Okay. So we'll go ahead and proceed with the first item on the agenda, which is a presentation regarding the 2020 sanitary sewer study. Is that Mr. Barkalow?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm going to kind of go over some high level stuff, and then Stephanie with HDR is going to give the actual presentation. So there was a 120-page report in your council packet. I'm not sure how many of you read every single page that's in there, but I just wanted to give it some high level items in there that maybe you got from the summary, and to kind of get level set with some of that stuff, and then Steph will dig into the details. So there is the big price tag in there of $83 million. That does double the population to 80,000. So to keep into perspective, that's not something that we're going to spend next year. This is a report looking at the entire sanitary sewer system, and we picked specific growth areas so that we can include it into the growth model. Some of the items, such as the joint trunk sewer project, which is with Hiawatha, Cedar Rapids, Robbins, that is already in the CIP. And then we had the previous study that was presented, and with that, those items are also already in the CIP, broken up into several years, because again, we're not going to do this in 1 year. And then, as you all know, we do have the manhole and slip lining project, which is about $300,000 that we spend per year. And there's some recommendations in the study that talks about that. I believe it's 8 million maybe that we're supposed to spend in that area. And then just a reminder that this is just one input that we will be putting in that growth model that Amala is working with Titular Bice on. And so that way we can look and see where is it easier for Marion to grow, or as a developer wants to grow in a certain area, is there other infrastructure that needs to be improved downstream of that so we're not causing other issues. So this is very big picture. So I doubt that most council members read the entire 120 pages. And Steph's not going to go over all 120 pages. She's going to give you a high level overlook of it, but it is important to understand this as we move forward with the city, because we do have areas of the town that do have moratoriums because we do not have capacity. If we get a large rainfall event, public service does have to go out there and put pumps in manholes and pump that down the street. It's not something we like doing, but it's something that we have to do so that we don't have backups. So you're going to see some big numbers, and some of it's going to be a little scary, but we need to talk about it and make sure everybody's on the same page. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steph, and she's going to dive into it. Please, if you guys have questions as she's going, we want to make sure we address those as we go to make sure everybody understands it.
All right, thanks, Mike. I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So like Mike said, we're going to go over the 2020 sanitary sewer study, kind of just the overview. Our agenda for today, we're going to go over, the goals and the tasks that we completed for the study. We'll go through our model results and recommendations. That's part of the costs that Mike was just talking about. And then we'll have a short summary that just lists, all of the recommendations that we have. And then after that, we'll kind of lead into an introduction to development impact studies. And so what that is, that would be kind of like the next steps, after we've completed this study, We're looking at full growth areas. The next step could be looking at, as individual developments come in, what can we do to evaluate those? So we'll look at that at the very end. So overview and goals. We built and calibrated a model that represents the city's entire sanitary sewer system. Like Mike mentioned, back in 2019, we did a previous study for Indian Creek sewer shed. And so that's the sewer shed shown here in green. And so a lot of what we presented in that study is carried over into what we have here today. But so then once we completed the Indian Creek study, we kind of went back in, and now we've completed the rest of the city. So we've broken the city out into 4 main sewer sheds. So we have Christopher Creek and Dry Run Creek on the west side, Lower Indian Creek on the south side of the city. This encompasses the Uptown District and is generally the older Marion area. And then lastly, we have the Squaw Creek Basin on the east side of the city. So you'll hear me reference those different basins and those different trunk lines throughout the presentation. So just so for your reference, this is where they're located throughout the city. And so part of our task for building and calibrating the model is we completed flow monitoring last summer. And so part of that, we installed 8 flow monitors for several weeks, and they captured the flow in the pipe throughout the city, and we use that to calibrate the model. And then our goals for the study, these were very similar to our previous Indian Creek study, if you are familiar with that. But first goal is to identify locations where there are sewer capacity deficiencies. And then with those capacity deficiencies, where are locations of potential basement backups or potential sanitary sewer overflows? So sanitary sewer overflows would be when the flow in the pipe shoots out of a manhole and is flowing down a street or is flowing into a creek. So first we wanted to identify where those locations would be. Then we identify, what are needed improvements to address those deficiencies, and we developed costs. These are concept level costs for those recommended improvements. And then we also looked at pipe sizes and probable costs to service future growth areas. So what would it cost to extend a new trunk line throughout the different growth areas that we looked at? So those were kind of our goals for the study. How we did that is we looked at 3 different events. So we looked at dry weather flow, which is on a sunny day like today where there's no rainfall, what is the flow in the pipe throughout the system? Then we looked at a 2-year wet weather flow, which would represent if about 3.1 inches of rain fell over the city, what would the flow in the pipe look like? And then lastly, the 5-year wet weather event would be if about 3.8 inches of rain fell over the city, what flow would look like in the system. So for each of those 3 events, we looked at a total of 13 development conditions. We're not going to go through all of these today, but if you want a detailed, description of what's included in each scenario, that's in table 1 of the report. So you can follow along there if you have questions about the different scenarios. But the 13 different scenarios are broken down into 4 main categories. So we have our current population within the existing service area category. We have 5 scenarios there. So current population, we estimated about 41,000 people. And then the existing service area is basically existing city limits. And then the next category was 2040 population and existing service area. So these 2 scenarios would represent growth. So we had an estimated of about 48,000 people for 2040 population, again, within basically existing city limits. Then third, we looked into growing outside of city limits. So we have 5 different growth areas on the north, east, and south side of the city. And then lastly, our full development condition, that would be, 2040 population in the existing area plus all 5 growth areas. Full development, this would we estimate about a population of 82,000. So doubling the population for the city, what would the full development look like? And so we looked at a total of 39 different scenarios. Like Mike said, we're not going to talk through all of them. I'm sure everybody would love to, but we'll keep it simple. So we're not going to go through all of them. If there are questions about any of them, if you did get a chance to go through the report, we can discuss them. But we'll focus on the main and primary ones. So before I get into next steps, modeling results and recommendations, does anybody have questions about the scenarios or the evaluation, the goals that we had to address this?
Anyone have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Steph, this is Grant Harper speaking, one of the council members. Just a quick question. Relative to the 24-hour rainfall rates that you used as an input to your model, would there be any difference to your modeling if those were flash rainfall rates, say within a 2-hour period or 3-hour period?
Yes, so the rainfall depths there, they would be different, but standard for design is to use a 24-hour rainfall depth. And so that's why we looked at the 24-hour depth there.
Okay, thank you. And for Mr. Barkalow's reference, I did page through the entire report.
That's good. All right, so as we're going through these results, a couple things. If you have the report handy, table 1 from the report again is a list of all the scenarios that we looked at. So you can keep an eye on that page, and then also figures 59 or 55 through 69 will also be handy. They show the different scenarios spatially. So if you want to see where we're talking at, what we're talking about throughout the city, you can look at those figures. All right, so before we get into like the details and the results of all the different scenarios that we looked at, I wanted to show, an example of what we define as a deficiency. And if you were here for the Indian Creek study, this is going to look familiar. This is how we present the results. But if you weren't, when we define a deficiency in the system, we look at 2 different things. So we have the surcharge state, and that's when we're looking at the pipe itself. So we're looking at how full is the pipe. When it's yellow, that means the pipe is less than 80% full. It's with capacity. And then as the color deepens to dark brown, the pipe is getting more full. And so when we get to the dark brown, that means that pipe segment is bottlenecked, which is there's more flow coming to the pipe than the pipe will allow to go through it. So it's restricting flow, and that's what's causing potential backups and potential overflow. So we're really looking for areas where we have brown segments of pipe, and then that leads to our second criteria, which is freeboard, and that's where we're looking at manholes. And so when we have a brown segment of pipe that's causing a backup, it fills the manhole, the water surface elevation in the manhole, and then either causes a backup or an overflow. So our criteria for a backup, which could be an area where it potentially backs up into a resident's basement, that occurs when our water surface elevation is less than 3 feet from the ground surface. And then the second criteria, an overflow, sanitary sewer overflow, that is when the water surface elevation is above the ground elevation, so flow is spilling out onto the street or into the creek. So those are our criteria for how we define a deficiency. Any questions on that?
Questions?
All right.
Okay.
So we defined our deficiencies. Now, how do we identify recommended improvements, defining that criteria? So like I just said, all sewer standard design is to design it to meet the 5-year, 24-hour wet weather event. So when we were looking at recommended improvements and proposing different projects, we were looking at the results for the 5-year event. And that's primarily what we're going to look at today. Not going to go through any of the 2-year results, going to try and focus on the 5-year where those improvements are recommended. And then when we had our list of improvements that we wanted, we prioritized them into 3 different tiers or categories. So the first tier, the highest priority, would be improvements needed to further development within the existing service area. So further development within existing city limits and address any existing condition issues. So that's tier 1. Tier 2 is then to address or have improvements that would enable expansion into the 5 different growth areas that we're going to go over. And then lastly, tier 3 would be improvements needed to address full development conditions or to double the existing population to 82,000. Questions on how we identified recommended improvements? All right. So now we'll start going into the model results. How this is set up is basically we're going to compare different scenarios to each other. So all these results are shown in Appendix B of the report. If you have questions. And then let's see here. So at the top of every figure represents S1 would represent scenario 1. So if you're trying to remember what that all entails, scenario 1 from table 1. And then here we have a dry weather flow condition versus a 5-year flow condition. And so scenario 1 is existing conditions. This is the system as it is today. If you went out and looked anywhere in the city, this is what we would expect to see. So on a dry weather flow, 99% of the pipes are flowing less than 80% full. So we aren't seeing any issues. We have a few areas where pipes are flowing more full, but we don't have any backups. So we don't have any deficiencies, no issues to address in a dry weather or normal day for the sewer system. But when we compare dry weather to a 5-year rainfall event, so again, about 3.8 inches of rain, you can see widespread potential backups and overflows, particularly along the Indian Creek and Dry Run Creek regional trunk sewer. So that's what Mike was mentioning is the program with Hiawatha, Robbins, and Cedar Rapids, that the regional trunk sewer along there. We have several backups along that line, which leads into backups in the Indian Creek Basin. And so if you remember, this figure looks very familiar from the Indian Creek study that we did. So we don't see a whole lot of other potential deficiencies in the Christopher Creek watershed. We get some that back up due to the regional trunk sewer deficiencies. We have a few in the lower Indian Creek, but really in the Squaw Creek, we wouldn't expect to see any issues if 3.8 inches of rain fell today. So then the first thing that we did was compare scenario 1 to scenario 3, which the only differences between these 2 scenarios is that in scenario 3, we assumed that the regional trunk sewer improvements are completed. So segment 3 through segment 11 is completed. I know the city's currently working on design and construction of segment 7, but assuming that all those improvements are completed, we wanted to know how much of the the backups and overflows we were seeing were caused by that regional trunk sewer. And as you can see, a majority of the issues that we found were due to that regional trunk sewer. So we have a significant reduction in overflows. Now the Indian Creek trunk line is mostly just potential backups, but we are still seeing some potential issues down in the lower Indian Creek Basin, but primarily the Indian Creek Basin. And so that leads us into our first set. Oh, is there a question?
Yes, Steph, Grant Harper here again. Just quickly, does that then suggest that scenario 3, to address scenario 3 5-year conditions, or for that matter, scenario 1 5-year is a high priority scenario to address?
Yep.
Okay.
So that kind of leads right into this next slide here of our highest priority project that we should be focusing on first. And so the 3 segments that we found were critical for reducing the deficiencies in scenario 1 are segment 7, 10, and 6. So segment 7's underway, but 10 and 6 are really the next highest priority that should be focused on to improve the conditions for the regional trunk sewer. But then we also found that there are 2 areas in the Indian Creek Basin within the city that even if all of the regional trunk sewer improvements are completed, we still have potential backups. And so we have 2 additional projects in the Indian Creek Basin that total about 1.7 million that we would want to prioritize for current conditions. And so if you've got your report open, projects 1 through 3 are shown in figure 6 of Appendix A, and then projects 4 and 5 are shown on figure 55. But what they are is adding capacity in the trunk line along this area, and then up along here, if you can see my mouse. And so these are the same projects that we had recommended in the 2019 Indian Creek study. So I believe these are already in the CIP and have been included there. So no change there. But yeah, 1.7 in the Indian Creek Basin and 11.5 in the regional trunk sewer improvements. All right, so moving ahead, these next set of scenarios are kind of our tier 2. And so these are going to address more future 2040 population deficiencies that we found. So here we're comparing scenario 3 to scenario 5. So again, scenario 3 has the regional trunk sewer completed. And then the difference between scenario 3 and scenario 5 is that in scenario 5, we assumed that we would have a 30% reduction in I&I in the area. And so I&I is inflow and infiltration. And what we found is that through the flow monitoring, the lower Indian or the older Marion area, there is high inflow and infiltration during rainfall events. So generally, the flow in the pipes in that area were relatively small on a normal dry weather day. But when rainfall occurred, the flow spiked a lot, causing some of the capacity issues there, that there wasn't enough flow because of the rainfall that's infiltrating into the pipe.
We have a question. Did you say I&I?
I&I, yes. So that's inflow and infiltration.
Okay. Thank you.
And-
That helps.
Yep. And so there are 2 options to address, so we see that there are potential backups and overflows and bottleneck pipes due to that in this area. So one option would be to increase the pipe size in that area to just make room for that additional flow during a rainfall event. But the other option is through I&I reduction improvements. And those can be anything from slip lining pipes and fixing leaky manholes. So those are already existing city programs. But it could also be things like disconnecting sump pumps if residents have their sump pumps connected or their downspouts connected to the sewer system, going through and making sure those are disconnected. Any effort that can be done to reduce rainfall getting into the sanitary sewer system. And so because flow monitoring, we found that this is an area that could really use, or that has a lot of I&I, inflow and infiltration. We would recommend, instead of doing pipe improvements, focusing the slip lining and the manhole programs in this area to help reduce that. And if we can do that, then we reduce the potential backups and overflow, so we don't need to do pipe improvements. Any questions on I&I, inflow and infiltration, or addressing that with current city programs? All right. So moving forward, comparing scenario 5. So again, this is what we just looked at. We have the I&I inflow and infiltration improvements done and the regional trunk sewer improvements done. Comparing that to scenario 6, the only differences between these two scenarios is that in scenario 6, we assume a 2040 population. So assume that we're increasing the population by about 7,000 people. So where that would be is that any area that's currently undeveloped, but within the city, if we developed those areas out. So what we found is that by adding the additional population, there were 2 more areas that were highlighted as in the future causing potential backups due to pipe deficiencies. So this first area here is in the Christopher Creek Basin, that the Christopher Creek trunk line is bottlenecked, causing a couple of backups here. And then we have just a small segment down in Squaw Creek, bottleneck pipe segment causing some potential backups. So those 3 things, potential I&I or I&I improvements, and then the 2 areas in the Christopher Creek and Squaw Creek Basin, as well as regional trunk sewer. Those projects then lead to our tier 2, second priority proposed improvements. So if we complete everything that was in that first table, the first priority projects, plus then complete these 4 projects shown in this table, then the sewer system would have capacity to meet 2040 development needs. And so first project, that was the Indian Creek trunk line, that's shown in figure 56 in the report, but that's about $2.3 million pipe improvement. And then the small improvement in the Squaw Creek Basin, that's shown in figure 57. And then here we have completing the rest of the regional trunk sewer improvements. So highest priority are segments 7, 10, and 6. And then once those are completed, we would want to complete the rest of the segments. So that leads to about 20.7 million. And then lastly, here's our I&I reduction improvements. And that could be up to about 8.5 million in the old Marion area, or the lower Indian Creek Basin. So we've got it broken down by basin, the cost. We're at a total cost of about 4.9 or $44.9 million, but most of that is in the regional trunk sewer improvements. So again, if all 9 of the projects were completed, that would bring the system into, without having any deficiencies for a 2040 development condition. any questions on what would be required for that?
Any questions?
Yes, Your Honor. Steph would, or Mike, for scenarios 1 through 5, as compared to 6 through 9, has there been any thought of, would those be done, those groupings of scenarios be done separately, or would they be worked on somewhat in parallel?
So the regional trunk, which she has separated out there, I don't know how much you know about that, but basically that one has a separate 28E agreement that whoever is in. So for example, now that we're doing segment 7, Marion is in charge of that. I believe we pay about 33% of that, and the rest come from the other municipalities. And so we cash flow that, and then they reimburse us. But for example, when segment 3 was going on in Cedar Rapids, they were the leader for it. So the regional, it depends on where it's at, and it could happen in concurrence with another. Her number 9 that she has, the I&I, we're going to do that every year. It's just a matter of how much we do. So again, I believe our budget annually is 300,000, depending on how many manholes and sewer lines that we can slip line through that. So some of these, we're taking small chunks of it at a time. So you can see that 8.6 number for I&I. We're only doing $300,000 a year. We're making a little ground, but we could spend more on that. So next year, when we get into the CIP and budget, these are things that we'll talk about, but we can only handle so much as far as staff capacity on these projects. So, there might be a regional trunk sewer, I&I, and maybe one other going on at the same time, but that's probably about it.
Okay, thank you. And you also clarified one thing in terms of any multi-jurisdictional participation. So thanks. That answers actually 2 questions. So thank you.
Yeah, and the regional trunk sewer, it does vary based on capacity. So back when the 2080 was put together, each municipality decided how much flow they wanted for each segment. So it varies segment by segment how much we pay. But in general, Marion pays around the 33% for each segment. The farther upstream you get, where we have less flow going into the system, we pay less.
All right. So these next 5 slides are going to get into the growth areas that we looked at. And so again, those are shown in the figures if you want to look at them spatially, but I'll kind of explain the areas here. Our growth area 1 is growth in the Christopher Creek Basin. And so that's on the west side of the city. And so that would be growing out west and then slightly north into this area here. And so what we found is that, adding population in this area, we're seeing some deficiencies down in the Indian Creek Basin, or in the Indian Creek trunk line down here. But if you complete the first project here, project number 6, if that's already completed, then these deficiencies go away. And so really the only project that we would recommend, or that will be required to grow into this area, would be new sewer to extend this trunk line to service those areas. So I know there's obviously a lot of things that go into consideration when you're looking at where to grow, but if we're strictly speaking, only looking at sewer, this would be a very easy and pretty cheap area for the city to grow into because the sewer has capacity. And so the table here just shows the continuation of the last table. The total cost we're looking at about 45 million, but again, that includes all of the other improvements through 2040 population. So then growth area 2 is on the north side of the city. This is in the Indian Creek and Barry's Run Creek Basin area. And so what we see here when we add additional population along this line is that we have significant potential backups and overflows. And this is because the Indian Creek trunk line is already near capacity today, which is why we already have those proposed projects to address current development conditions. So we expected to see these results when we were inputting this additional growth. This is where the city already has the existing moratorium due to sewer is in this area. But we wanted to include it so we could get an idea of what it would take to address the deficiencies to be able to grow into this area. So our first project is again new sewer, just extending the sewer line. And then the next 3 projects are basically increasing the pipe size of the trunk line for Barry's Run and then all along Indian Creek. And so these projects are shown in more detail in figures 60 through 63, if you want to look through those. But what it kind of boils down to is that we're at about 56.9 million for total improvements. So when you compare that to growth area 1, which was less than 45 million, see that it's going to be a lot more expensive to grow into this area because of those existing Indian Creek trunk line deficiencies. Any questions on this one? All right, so growth area 3, very similar. It's also still in the Indian Creek Basin, but more on the northeast side of the city. So what we found here, again, we have new sewer to accommodate that additional growth. And then in addition, you know, the projects, 2 of the projects that were in this last table here are project 12 and 13 would still need to be required along the Indian Creek trunk line, plus 1 more to extend. This is project 16 up to the northeast. So the total there is we're at about $60 million. So again, same sort of scenario is that, you know, because of the existing Indian Creek trunk deficiencies, it's going to be a lot more expensive to grow into this area for the city. And so these 2 projects are shown in figure 64 if you're following along through there. Any questions about growth area 3?
I have a question for Mike. When we talk about new sewer, that's generally paid for by the developers, right?
So only the 8-inch size. So if they have to upsize it to serve someone to the north or upstream of them, the city actually does pay for that oversizing with
Sure.
the connection fee that we could get back. Or for example, when Linmar went in on the northwest, there was an access fee for that sewer, and that watershed paid for those. Yeah, it is a potential cost. Some of it would be borne by the developer, but not all of it.
Okay. Thanks. Any other questions before we proceed? All right, go ahead.
All right, so growth area 4 is on the east side of the city in the Squaw Creek Basin. And here we have, again, new sewer to extend that trunk line, as well as that, you know, additional growth on the east side. We found a short segment of bottleneck pipe leading to a couple of potential backups along the main Squaw Creek trunk line. So we have a project to address that. So 2 projects here. These are shown in figure 65. And so with the addition of those projects, we're seeing a total of about 46.9 million. And so looking at the other growth areas, you know, like growth area 1, this growth area 4, strictly speaking, sewer-wise would be a lot easier for the city to grow into. There'd be less improvements and less projects needed. And then lastly, the 5th growth area is along the south side of the city. So we're looking in Squaw Creek Basin around the airport, as well as a small area in the lower Indian Basin near East Post Road. So when we add growth in that area, we have, again, extending new sewer, But then we also found that the line that runs along Grantwood Trail, with the additional flow being added there, we've got bottleneck pipe. And so we've got a small project to address that deficiency there. So again, like growth area 1 and growth area 4, growth area 5 would be pretty easy for the city to grow into. Only a couple of projects needed, looking at a total of about 47 million.
Yeah, go ahead. Steve has a question.
Yeah, Stephanie, question. So if we're looking at this table 8 here that's on the screen, are we looking at this correctly? You're saying that in order to develop that area 5, that the total cost of that would be $46 million because all of those other trunks that you're identifying down below have to be done in order to support that area?
Not necessarily. So if we only wanted to support this growth area, we would be looking at just the Squaw Creek Basin. This cost here, the total cost that we're giving here would be to address citywide deficiencies. So this would, it would take $47 million to have no deficiencies in the city if there was a 2040 population and we're growing in this area. But
Okay.
yeah, so you could grow just only in this area here. If you didn't grow in these other areas, then you wouldn't have some of these other costs. But this would be, this is looking at everything, the citywide as a whole.
So in this area, particular area, what I'm kind of looking at and saying, all right, what is the incremental cost of growing in any of these areas, and say area 5, but you have the 2 numbers identified up above, but you're saying you also need to make sure you have down below the basin cost completed in order to support this expansion. Is that correct? So here we'd have the $1,260,000, the $860,000, but then we would also have to have the Squaw Creek Basin cost of $2,270,000.
So that would be, that would be the sum of these 2 projects. So to grow in just this area, it would just be this cost, but that's only for this growth area.
She was saying that addressing deficiency and at the same time allowing for growth in that area would require this much money. So we're working on addressing existing conditions. So we were saying it will take this much to address and maintain the condition while allowing this area to grow.
Well, I know eventually we're going to have to come down to, as a city council, and saying, all right, so we've identified 5 potential growth areas. And maybe as we work on this growth model, that'll answer some of the questions. But eventually we need to be identifying which are the areas of the city that we want to either further strongly support or encourage growth because of the impact on the cost to the city.
Yes, correct. That's exactly the objective here, is to be able to separate those and then figure out a way to have that development bear the cost of those sewer improvements as well.
Okay.
All right, was there, Grant, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So I guess going to Steve's point, if we were to have equally vigorous development in all of the growth areas, we would be incurring large segments of all of these project costs in parallel. And is that right?
Yeah, Grant, if you wait just a little bit, she's gonna show you one with everything.
Oh, okay. All I'm trying to do here, and I think Steve's point was really important, is that we promote growth in a few of our areas and kind of put a moratorium, that's the wrong word, but to delay growth in other areas that might have a higher cost impact. Okay, thanks. This is starting to be very fascinating in terms of development control.
Yes, yeah. So that was the 5 growth areas. And so the last scenario we looked at was, all right, what if we put all of them together? What if everything grew at the same time? Or, if tomorrow the population was 82,000 people, what would it take? And so I don't have all of the projects here in the presentation. If you want to look through all of them, they're in table 9 of the report. But it's basically just a combination of all the different projects that we just went through, plus a few additional projects, a few additional projects that are needed further out in the Squaw Creek as well as in the Indian Creek Basin. So these projects listed here, 21 through 24, would be in addition to what we already talked about in the different growth areas. So these are, again, the full table is in the full list of projects is in table 9 and figures 55 through 69. But that's where we kind of boil down to the $83 million that Mike mentioned early on. This is what would be everything needed if the city grew in all areas, more in parallel than focused in the other, focusing in one area or another. So most of that is in regional trunk sewer improvements, about 45%, but still pretty significant improvements needed in the other basins.
So this is a lot of information here. Next step, staff will take this and come up with a way to prioritize growth areas and recommendation on how to incentivize and disincentivize development in a way, steering development for the city to grow in a smart way, using one aspect, sewer extension costs, as well as other services provision costs. We will be overlaying, for example, facilities. Which way is the best way to grow without adding a 4th or a 5th fire station, for example? And then looking at the street network as well, which the best way we should be incentivizing to minimize our cost in extending city infrastructure, including maintenance and solid waste pickup. So we'll come up with a prioritized primary growth areas, and also we'll come up with recommendations for city council on how to program sewer improvements to serve that growth areas plan.
Okay.
So that Amal just gave a very nice summary for us. Well, bringing everything together, we've got our list of improvements that are needed to address different conditions. Our highest priority, current development conditions, then growth or 2040 development conditions, then our 5 growth areas. And again, growth area 1, 4, and 5 are going to be the easiest sewer wise to grow into, and then our full development conditions. So that kind of summarizes the improvements that we recommend in the report. A couple other recommendations from the report that we didn't talk about as much today are, just continuing to support these CIP projects, as well as continuing to support and fund those I&I inflow and inflow reduction projects, like slip lining or manhole improvements. And then that kind of concludes our presentation for the 2020 study. So if there are additional comments or questions, we can talk more. Otherwise, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Scott, and he's going to talk about our next steps in evaluating the sewer system, which would be, to look at needs and impacts as individual developments come in.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right. Scott, you are up.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. So we've had a lot of talk about growth and potential improvements. So one of the things that we can use the hydraulic model for is to analyze the impact of certain developments or specific developments as they come into town and start to, mature, and we can more accurately define actually what they're going to be. So typically these developer impact studies include determining the incremental impact of proposed developments, defining the loading assumptions and the design criteria we're using to analyze these developments. And then we have to clearly define the baseline, what we're analyzing the system against. So without analyzing the system without the development, which is our baseline case, and then with the proposed development. And then once we do the analysis, we develop an impact study technical memorandum. So typically, the data that we'll get from the development is either a utility plan, which has the preliminary utility infrastructure laid out with maybe some lot lines and some land use unit counts, which is an example that we actually did here locally on the left there. And then the example on the right is actually one that we got from you, where we'll get a site plan which has proposed unit counts and some land use, and we can develop our loads based on this data. So then what we do is we take that and we develop our loads, and we'll go and we'll run the hydraulic model, and we'll get results for recommended upsizing. And this is where it's very important to establish our baseline. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at what the impact of the development is. Steph laid out a lot of improvements. So what we can do is we can analyze the timing of these improvements, if they're required for a particular developer. And then if they are required, then we can clearly identify, here's the pipeline diameter that we established in our baseline, and then here's the incremental impact or the pipeline diameter that needs to be upsized because of your development. And we'll do a list of recommended improvements. And then we've had a lot of discussion on costs, and I heard some things about cost sharing as well. So in that case, we can clearly identify what's the proportionate cost for the developer and what's the proportional cost for the city. And then lastly is just what do these things typically cost? We've done a lot of these in the area, and they can range anywhere from kind of simple studies for analysis and technical memorandum. From the typical range is $5,000 to $10,000 basically. So 5,000 will be on the lower end, a simple study, small number of units, uniform land use, and key to this is service connection. Is it a straightforward service connection, 1 point, maybe 2 points? And then we can get into the higher end, which are more complex studies, which have larger units, mixed land use, gets a little bit more complicated. And then if we're looking at alternatives for service, maybe multiple connection points, maybe it makes more sense to go one direction or the other to avoid an improvement. And this would include all the development of the loads, the hydraulic analysis, the design criteria, and then a technical memorandum or report that clearly defines what those impacts are. And that's basically it for development impact studies. Any questions? that I can
Question,
answer?
Scott? Yeah, go ahead.
So a question for either Scott or for Mike, are these development impact studies currently being done, or is this a new proposal?
So this is a new proposal. So let's just take the old YMCA site. So as you know, as we went through the process of reviewing the site plan there, traffic control and that came up. And so they had to do a traffic study where they looked at the trip generation. So this would be the same thing, but looking at our sanitary sewer system. So by going from an existing Y facility to 150 unit complex, what does that do to our sanitary sewer system? And does that cause issues downstream? And so this is a proposal that we would proceed forward with if council was in favor of it, that as development occurs, we would make them do this as part of that development to look at it to make sure they're not causing downstream issues with the sanitary sewer system, just like we would a traffic model to make sure they weren't causing congestion that is visible. So unless council has some issues with this, we would like to move forward with this proposal as HDR has the base model built. And so as developments come in, they can then run the different scenarios. It can be for a subdivision or a simple site plan like the old YMCA site, but it would be a new proposal.
Yeah, Mike, Grant here. I guess, given what's been presented in the more detailed report and in the presentation this afternoon about where we have, as I will say, potential system constraints in the total sanitary sewer system, this seems like a logical thing to do. Maybe not necessarily for a single building, but certainly for our more complex buildings that are being developed. So I guess in general, I would be in favor of including this as part of standard operating procedures for us.
Yeah, so this
Agreed. Seems to make sense, and where the use is going to change in a particular parcel, it's going to be, you know, the impact or the use is going to change drastically, or completely different use, or more intense use. It seems I think it makes sense. So I think it'd be on a case by case basis where you see what the new project is. If it's a redevelopment, certainly. If it's a greenfield, definitely. And if it's a redevelopment, you'd see on a case by case basis what that new use is and its impact on the system.
Well, if it's somebody that loses a house with a fire and they're building their house back up, that's not something that we would do. It would be redevelopment in the uptown because we're going from a single story to 3 or 4 story mixed use, stuff like that. So it would be.
That's a perfect example.
So what staff proposes is we'll work on a policy to bring forward for city council to adopt. And then at the next council meeting, we will also receive, file, and discuss this 120-page report so that we have it on record. And then we can use that as one of many inputs in the growth management study.
Okay. Any other questions? Is that it for the presentation, or is there more?
I think that's it, unless there's some questions.
Any questions? Okay, so we'll be waiting to hear more from staff on this. Okay,
Thank
thank you, everyone.
And I'm not sure how to stop sharing. All right, there we go.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda is item number 2, which is a presentation regarding the 2022 tentative budget. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Your Honor and City Council. This presentation is going to be short. promise to keep to that this time. And most of all is because of the work that's done previously. During the last meeting that we had with City Council about 2 weeks ago, it was a very engaged meeting, and we appreciate once again your review of the budget. And what this is this is an overview of those changes since the last time and what you expect to see in some of the high level changes in the FY22 budget. But no, there's not a request for an additional $83 million in FY22. So yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, wait for that to a later date over multiple years. Next slide, Tara. The property taxes impact, just to remind City Council what was discussed last time. Move forward to the tentative budget, which would be the adopted budget, unless there's any other recommendations put forth by council, is we'd be looking at a tax reduction this next year of about 1.5 cents. This would be the third year of either a property tax reduction or a flat levy. It was flat in FY20, a reduction in 21, and once again another reduction in 22. How that plays out for the average residential home, or per $100,000 of taxable valuation on a residential home, is an increase of $18. That's due to the rollback. So once again, as those values shift on the residential home annually, that does change. No, it is a property tax rate decrease, but it would increase slightly. But conversely, on commercial as well as multi-residential, both of those would be seeing a decrease, being the commercial and industrial rates are fixed at 90%. So that would be a reduction of $1 per $100,000 of taxable valuation on commercial. So pretty much keeping it flat there. And then multi-residential, you'll see a much larger swing of $54 per $100,000 of taxable valuation. And just a reminder to City Council, that's because the tax valuation for the rollback valuation for multi-residential is declining every year until it equalizes, correct, with residential, I think in 2 years from now. So those just show so the graph itself, once again, shows that the tax rate being held steady. And it also shows the tax dollars paid per $100 of assessed valuation on a residential property. Just to note, once again, that the value is lower than FY22 considerably by about $9. And there was a big shift in 21. I think it's, do my math on the fly right now, $27 decrease there as well. So once again, though it is an increase this next year, it's really still less than if you take into account the prior year, that was reduced over the last 2 years. So I just want to make sure City Council is aware of that, of being judicious with the tax rate and the implications for that for this next year. Next slide. So the 4 pillars of the budget priorities, as laid out in the previous memos and presentations: 1, investing in our employees. Secondly, making sure to fund strategic plan priorities. 3rd, maximizing technology investments. And 4th, enhancing service delivery. Next slide. Under the investment in employees, once again, a reminder that in the general fund expenditures cover about, or 75% of general fund expenditures cover employee costs. So that will be the lion's share of any changes there will matriculate over to the general fund. We have in the budget right now an allowance increase of 2.5%. And once again, we use the word allowance because based on our pay for performance model, those performance reviews will determine if an employee would receive up to the maximum of 2.5%. Retirement contribution rates. Oh, sorry, Tara. Good job though. Keep me moving. Under the retirement contribution rates, a reminder that this did increase for municipal police and fire. This has continued to increase over time, so it's something we're looking at as a long-term trend. But it did go up 3.4% year over year. And then lastly, the health insurance increases of 6%. This is to continue to make sure that we're funding appropriately the rates necessary to keep up with the significant inflationary pressures that we're seeing in medical health insurance costs over time. Next slide, Tara. For the second budget priority, you'll see a number of lines in here. I'm sorry, I try to get in as many lines as possible, but it's also a testament to showing the strategies that the city's moving forward with in order to move forward the strategic plan as outlined by council this last year. FY21 is the first year, and as we're moving through FY23. Under VC, that's Vibrant Communities. We have a part-time recreation programmer set in the budget, new library building expenses, as well as increased hours for our part-time events coordinator that we currently have on staff. Under efficient and effective government, we have an addition of a new position for procurement coordinator that we talked about previously, that we're excited about really further developing our procurement processes in the city, as well as looking into new areas that we haven't done previously. Under HR growth and development training, we expect this to be a very high impact area in the city for the coming years in developing additional management capacity for managers and, or I should say, directors as well as managers, as well as giving us another, using Mike's words, input to look at as we're assessing new staff coming into the organization. Under sustainable infrastructure, you just listened to a very comprehensive review of one of the areas of sustainable infrastructure. One of the areas under that is our is looking at our sewer lines, but more so on the position costs, looking to make sure that we are being protective over the assets that we're building in the city. The first one is the right-of-way technician, which will allow us to make sure that we do keep control and oversight of those new assets that are being built. The second one is the environmental specialist, which this will be born entitling the stormwater management fund in order to move forward the initiatives in that fund. Next is an equipment operator. This is in road use to continue to address the growth and the mileage that they have in the support in the management of the roads, which we've seen very often this year. And lastly, a solid waste management study, which will be a very comprehensive study, similarly as what was just presented to City Council, looking at the sewer infrastructure, of really looking at our solid waste infrastructure and saying, what does the next chapter look like for the City of Marion as we grow out that area. Lastly, in this area is safe communities. And the first one there, the mental health liaisons. This is an initiative that the police department has gotten ahead of in this year and actually started it. So it's in the budget to continue that forward this next year. And then lastly, the public information management system, which I'll hold a couple comments to that till the next section, which will be Terrell's favorite. Maximize technology investments. The IT application specialist is the first position here. And one of the reasons is because we expect this to be a very significant lever into looking at our current systems that we have and leveraging those in new ways, as well as reconnecting across the organization. So there's a lot of excitement about this position coming on across the organization. Miscellaneous billing to address some of the gaps we have with our billing of accounts that aren't picked up by the water department. And then the one I forementioned, the public safety information management system. It's placed in two areas just to highlight the impact it would have in the organization. It would be looking to connect police, fire, and emergency services in new ways, and pulling out information, as well as modernizing some of the ways that information is collected and stored in the organization. So this will be a multi-year initiative, and this has funds in there for $300,000 for the first year development and implementation of that. Next slide, Tara. And then budget priority number 4, enhanced service delivery. Permit technician and housing admin. This is to address buildings increase over this last year, as well as into the future, as they've continued to take on a further role in the permitting process and making sure that they're responsive to the community and able to move things forward in a timeful manner. This position will help them streamline some of their processes. Online codification. This as well will help us from the public facing side so that the public can better understand and find our code. Civil rights investigation increase reestablishes the funding that we had of an additional $15,000 that was previously allocated out of the civil rights org. And then lastly in there, just making note of 2 of the master planning efforts for Tower Terrace and Furno East this next year. One of the other areas of priority in there is also the derecho. This has kind of marked the year. We have COVID and we have derecho. I had a slide I provided to staff, and I didn't put it in this one, but it said good riddance FY20, and that was kind of the leader for this, because I know a lot of people would like to put that behind them. Lon said it very well, that this is a multi-year recovery effort. But the city, I should say, is doing a remarkable job in looking to move forward and set aside dollars to repay or pay for about half of the expected city costs. So once again, high level, this we're currently estimating that it should clean up around $43 million after accounting for what we are currently budgeting for the FEMA and state coverage of 75% and 10%. That would be 15% for the city to pay, and then we have in the budget in FY22 $3 million of that being paid this next fiscal year. $1.5 million from road use, $1 million from the general fund, and then $500,000 from stormwater management. So we'll have better figures in the next 3 to 6 months as to how our FEMA reimbursement is going, and to see how we're moving across with that, as well as to see if any additional costs that we expect to bring in through some of the in-kind dollars that should help us defray some of these costs. Next slide. The post that I should clean up, reforestation. I don't know if I mentioned beforehand, but Mike Simprich in Parks mentioned to me, he said the emerald ash borer, which was the previous focus or primary focus of urban forest to address, is often called the slow moving natural disaster. Well, now that the fast moving natural disaster knocked down a number of those trees, and some of those would be taken out, it's really allowing them to pivot and to look now, instead of addressing that issue, to saying, okay, how do we rebuild the tree canopy in the city? And it'll be done so primarily through partnerships, looking for community stakeholders with some of the work that's already been done, and then also coming to the future, some of the other opportunities that they're looking forward to. So I'm really excited about this, because I also think it's an opportunity for us to engage residents in what do you want the city to look like over the next 30, 40, 50 years. It'll be more an opportunity for urban forest to help guide that process and provide the education necessary for that building of the reforestation of the city of Marion. So more to come later on with the parks with that, but this is one of the areas of the shifting in the focus for this next year. Next slide. Under capital projects, we have a number of capital projects that City Council looked at during the budget work sessions, but wanted to make sure to highlight these four. The first of which has the picture there, and will be right next to us, the new Marion Public Library. It's expected to be completed this next year. I believe the opening date is still set for March. So we're almost a year away. It's amazing how quickly that project has moved forward. One of the other major projects is the extensions of 6th Avenue, which is in the budget for this next year, as well as the start of the 7th Avenue streetscape. City Council received a pretty comprehensive overview of some of the plaza and some of the redevelopment efforts. I believe it was the last City Council meeting. So there's some very exciting plans ahead of the city in this area. And then lastly in there, the public services facility, which has been in the budget for a couple of years, and we're really excited into seeing how much of the completion can be done in FY22. It will likely span a little bit into FY23, but hopefully we're nearing the corner on that facility as well. So these are the four major capital projects that we wanted to highlight and make note of for City Council. Next slide, Tara. So looking at the proprietary funds, this is really the sixth priority that we have when we look in the budget. It's really an annual priority, but making sure that we're looking at it on an annual basis. And that's to make sure that our proprietary funds, each of the individual funds, are self-supporting. Once again, each proprietary fund needs to receive enough revenue and to cover its ongoing expenditures. If not, that's where we start looking at rates structure. Two of them are going to be highlighted today, and those are the two with the recommended increases. The first of which is the sanitary sewer system. For our increase in Cedar Rapids waste treatment fees, this is the major factor that's really impelling us to move forward with the rate increase in FY22. It had been previously mentioned that this is something that we have on our horizon on a long-term basis to look at, but this will allow us through the 7% increase to make sure that we get closer to our structural balance in the fund, And the decision was made, as a reminder, city council is made up of two components. One, you pay $2 flat fee for every household. And then the second piece is you pay based upon a flow rate of how much consumption you have. And the decision was made to put it on the consumption side in order to make sure the costs for that would more heavily be or would be borne more so by the consumers, the heavier consumers of water, rather than it to be shared equally through a flat base. So that's the reason why that 7% was placed there. It's estimated to impact the average bill about, I think it's $1.95 a month based upon the average bill. And this is the first of the two increases being recommended. Next slide, Tara. Solid waste here, and I put these pictures, actually, I kind of brought it back from last year. It's really interesting to learn about. Previously, I used to work at the county, and I wasn't involved in all of the intricacies in waste management. And it's amazing to understand too, the waste management process isn't just a localized process and cost structure, but also internationally, especially when we're dealing with recycling and moving trash. It was one of the classes, or one of the pictures in there is actually, I think it's from Wuhan, China, actually. But the 7% increase here is recommended primarily to address two sides of the recycling market. The recycling market, one, the revenue we used to receive, it's around $62,000 a year for recycling revenue. That is expected to go away almost complete, or that's expected to decrease by that amount. We're expected to receive a small portion, but that's a significant reduction. And then on the other side, the tipping fees have continued to increase for the recycling rates. So those two pieces in there are the reason why we're recommending a 7% increase, or $1.25 a month to solid waste. Next slide. So how does that look looking at across our utility rates, including water, as well as the property taxes in there? And I apologize, I left in the highlighted part from last time. So sanitary sewer is flat, even though it's orange in there. So you'll see in the red, the two areas that are recommended for an increase, the solid waste as well as the sanitary sewer. Additionally, water's still contemplating a 5 to 8% water increase this next year, which also has a water excise tax. All those added together would be $5.26 a month. Additionally, this next year that we're looking at on the average home, annualized, that's $63.10. And then if you also look at the property tax rate, and that's the new rate, once again, the reduction 14.19976. That would be an additional $30, and that's annually on a house, the median price house that I pulled from the census of $168,700. So the total amount on an annualized basis would be $93.10 for properties that meet these characteristics for this next year. Next slide. So currently we are in February, right there, dab in the middle of the tentative budget presentation. Actually, a little bit later on today, I'll talk to you about the public hearing on maximum property taxes, which will come forth at this next meeting. And then we're looking forward to the March 16th final budget presentation to City Council. And with that, I'd gladly take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Questions for Zach?
Yes, Your Honor. Grant here, I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Zach, so I just want to maybe highlight back on that summary table you had. That one, yes, thank you. So the solid waste and the sanitary sewer, those increases are principally driven by external forces that we don't directly control, correct?
I'd say the majority of them, yes. We do have some increases in there for staff of 2.5%, as well as the increase for health rate or health insurance of 6%. And there's a couple other inflationary factors, but the majority of the costs in there are due to those two factors that have been previously mentioned.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, we have a higher cost of being charged to us for sanitary sewer processing, and also for essentially tipping fees at the solid waste agency. That's correct, right?
Correct. And to also put in perspective, 'cause, it's a good question. On the sanitary sewer, the 7% is expected to bring in, increase is expected to bring about $430,000 this next year. With that, though, are some of the budgeted costs from what we budgeted last year to this next year are expected to change by almost $780,000. And the reason why is this figure that we used this last year for our cost for Cedar Rapids was the best figure we had at the time when we built the budget. We don't get the new rates right away. So we're right sizing that to what our current rate is. So that's the portion on sanitary sewer. On solid waste, the 7% increase equates to about $155,000 increase. So the cost structure is much lower there. So looking at the 62,000 that we're losing on the 62,000 that we're losing on the revenue side, plus the, I think it's around 20 to 30% of our tipping fee of our garbage is related to recycling weight. So as those fees are climbing at a much higher rate than they've previously done, the offset of that revenue, loss in revenue, and the increase in expenditures is what's driving the request or the recommendation for an increase in rates.
Yeah. I think the distinction that I just wanted to have clarity on, and perhaps for the listening audience, is just that there are cost drivers external of the city of Marion that are helping to increase those. That's all I was really trying to highlight for general understanding.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah, and one other thing, if I can mention too, while we're on that topic, because I think it's a really good question, Grant, is also utility fees over time will have increases, meaning unless we're able to keep down even the costs that we can control over time, there are inflationary pressures that we see with staff costs, with health costs, and also with commodity costs moving forward. So absent significant changes in efficiencies and in developing new models and looking at the processes differently. Over time, the expectation is there would be increases somewhere between the realm of 2 to 5% potentially on an annual basis. And that's one of the reasons too for the solid waste study is to look to see the trajectory that we're currently on and looking to say, okay, what does the solid waste framework look like in the next 10 to 20 years for the city? Because the investments that we make will then set that path forward for the service delivery option as well as the cost to sustain that.
Thanks a lot, Zach, for that additional information.
Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I appreciate it once again, City Council, and look forward to the discussion or the.
What's the next step?
Oh, the next step is March 16th is budget adoption, which is music to my ears. I'm smiling greatly underneath here. So City Council will get a final memo, an overview memo, as also reports on the finalized budget. But once again, I appreciate and want to mention again the work of staff as well as City Council in this process because it's a lot of information to digest and consider. So thank you very much for your
Definitely a group
engagement.
effort. So thank you. One more question for you.
Please.
Say derecho.
Derecho.
I love how you say that.
Yeah. Y lo que podemos hacer también, si queremos hacer el budget en español, o por supuesto en español, aquí estamos. Gracias.
You have to tell us what you said later. Okay. Next is item number 3, presentation regarding a request to rezone property from C3 to M1. This is the Green Acres storage request. Tom, are you with us?
I am. I believe this is an opportunity for Mr. Green.
Wait. We're not able to hear you.
Oh, you're not able to hear me?
Mayor, Mr. Green is on the line and available. He had asked for an opportunity to present to the council, so we had arranged this for him. Just looking at the Zoom meeting, I can see he has the microphone, so it looks like Rachel's got him set up to be able to speak.
Yep, I'm here, Mayor and Council. And are you going to do the slideshow for me?
Yes, just let us know when you want to go to the next slide.
Awesome. I appreciate Mayor and Council to let me present this project and take a little time so I can kind of explain the industry too and what our project's all about. So this kind of gives you an overview of where the project is. It's directly across from the Walmart there on 13 and 151. So let's go to the next slide. So kind of an overview of why we're here. So you probably don't know this, but I've tried to find property in Marion for about 4 years now to put a second location. We currently have a location on Lyndale Drive and Blair's Ferry Road, right in that intersection. And I don't want to say it's been a kind of a negative thing, but it's been a negative process that we have trouble finding land that is zoned correctly, or challenges of where it can go. You know, it could be restraints on the size of the property and stuff. So there's been lots of hurdles in this community here, and it's been a long struggle for 4 years trying to get a second location. One of the hurdles here, or why we're here, is the property currently is zone C3, where storage is allowed. This lot that we're looking at and we're proposing it on. The problem with this is that they're going to change it to the BR district. So when we first looked at this lot, I assumed, when the realtor called me, I assumed that this lot was zoned industrial. And over the last 4 years, that's where they've always recommended me to go, was in the industrial. For some reason, they're not fans of it going into the C3, but it's allowed. So I assumed it was zoned industrial because I thought this was Marion's industrial park. And I thought, oh, awesome. This is going to be a perfect location for us because I've got the visibility and that's what we like. So when I heard that, okay, it's zone C3, it was still allowed. So that was great. But when we sat down with the planning department, so generally how I approach every project, doesn't matter if it's this city or another city, is I sit down with the planning department and try to get their feel, get input on what they would like to see, how they would like to see us proceed. And that's when I learned that they're going to change it to the BR district, where we're not going to be allowed. So it wasn't where, you know, and I said, well, what can we do to make this happen or whatever? It was more negative, or I guess that they weren't willing to work with me or come up with a solution or whatever. So, you know, restricting storage, or, you know, restricting it to an industrial park is a hurdle that we have. And the council asked the planning department to come up with if it would be feasible in the BR district, or some ideas or guidance. And one of the other things is you had them research what other cities do. And so we helped with that research and presented to you guys over the last few months. But that was done last November when we did all this. So it seems like it's kind of been quite a while. But the biggest thing we need is, we're going to spend between $6 and $7 million. And I need assurance that if I build this, I can build it today. That's not a problem. And we want to go forward with this. But I need some assurance that it's going to be a conforming business, not you know, a legal non-conforming business. I just need some assurance. If you were to put yourself in my position and spend this kind of money, you would want to know that, okay, if we have another derecho come through and blow my building down, I would put all this effort and time and get staff and build a customer base, and then the storm blows it down and then we can't rebuild it. So that's kind of the dilemma that we're after. And I don't know how, I guess I'm open to different ways for the path to go. I can get this zoning changed and it will be allowed. or you guys can direct the planning department to allow it in the BR district. You can probably do a conditional use. You guys probably know better on what would be allowed. But I think even on our existing facility, we are getting changed from C3 to the BR district, and we will be a legal non-conforming business. Not only about this project, but all the other storage operators, I think we all are going to want some reassurance that, hey, we can continue to do the industry that we love. So next slide. So I want to give you a background. So this was the zoning stuff that I presented to you guys, and the city council also did their research. Most of, so Marion is changing it. Right now we're allowed in C3, and it's probably allowed in about 5 different districts. You know, you're allowed in the industrial and whatnot. And then the new code is basically taking us down to 1 zoning. So we are 1 zoning away from being eliminated in a city. But you look at all these other cities, and we tried to get cities that were comparable in size, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe a little smaller, but Ankeny, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, and we presented that all to you in an email. But all of them allow us in between 5 and 10 different districts. So I guess one of the questions that hopefully will be answered in part of this is, why did Marion take this down so drastically that we're basically 1 zone code away from being eliminated in a city? So that's one of the questions I have, is why is it so drastic, and what does Marion know that this business and industry is so bad that all of these other cities don't? And I think that's a conversation that hopefully will take place. Next slide. So now I want to get, there's a little bit of negativity there, I guess you could say, because I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do. I'm proud of what I do. 1 in 10% of residents use self-storage. So it's a service that your residents need, everybody in Marion, no different than a convenience store, no different than a grocery store, and they want convenience. So what we're proposing is a 3-story, 130,000 square foot facility. It's fully enclosed, so no storage units are on the outside of the building. It's all climate control. We have a retail office. We're creating 3 jobs. And we don't need any more jobs in the country, but we are creating 3 jobs, 100% owner funded. So we're potentially going to spend about $7 million with no TIF. So everything's on my shoulders. If I sink or fail, it's all on me. I'm not asking the taxpayers for anything. Next slide. This kind of gives you an overview of what our site plan looks like. And I just kind of wanted to show you so you kind of knew. It gives you the footprint of it, or an overview. The next slide. And this is an actual rendering. And this represents, I think the planning has maybe a little bit older versions. We've gone through several versions, but I think we've got it into the city right now for an approval for the site plan. One of the things that I can talk very highly of is I think we do a very good job on how we make this look. And later on in the presentation, I'll show you what we did in other cities so that you can see that we take everything in consideration. So when we came to the planning department, we asked, do you want to see some type of other surfaces on the building to dress it up and make it look nice? I'm one of these guys that I want everybody to be behind it and be just as excited about my project as I am. So one of the things I pride myself in is trying to do a nice design, aesthetically pleasing, and then also landscaping. I can tell you, I've got some of the numbers. So one of the things that came out as we're going through this process with the civil engineer and the landscape architect is there's 28 trees required for this project. We're putting in 41. There's 90 shrubs that are required. We're putting in 410 shrubs. I've done this in every city. I've done almost triple the landscaping requirements because I understand curb appeal sells. They want to see a really nice looking facility. And I think we meet and exceed that to no end. And that's the kind of input that I want from cities, you know, that, hey, I'm willing to do this, and, you know, let's work on this together and make this great. The next slide will just give another view of it. And so all the landscaping, I know developers will come in and really make it, you know, shine, but this is actually what we have proposed. It's into the city, the exact landscaping, the trees, everything, what the building's going to look like, down to every little detail. Then the next slide. So a background about us. We're locally owned. Our main office is right in Marion here. We currently employ about 20 individuals. We operate 7 facilities in Iowa, and we have 3 multi-story level ones, and they're in Dubuque, Waterloo, and Ankeny. And I'm going to show you what those look like and where they're at in the community. So this kind of gives you a basis when we're trying to change the zoning, how we do fit in. We serve a wide range of household, commercial, and startup businesses. I'm not sure if the council knows, but lots of small businesses that are just getting their feet on the ground actually use self-storage. It could be a little boutique that somebody does, you know, husband and wife started it in their basement of their house with a website, and they store their product in our thing and wait for it to be shipped out or something. You know, we're almost part of, you know, an incubator for small businesses to start up, because it appeals to them because it's month to month. They're not tied into any long-term lease. And so it really appeals to a lot of different companies. It could be just somebody that maybe is an electrician that can't afford a long-term lease for, you know, a 6-year lease or a 10-year lease or whatever, and they can see if they can get their feet on the ground, and then it might prosper. So not only do we help, you know, household, commercial, and other type of businesses, when the derecho hit, I can tell you that I sat at the counter and we were super busy. Every storage facility in our area was completely filled, because we took care of a need by people that were in distress and had a disaster on their hands. And I felt good about it. Some people can say, well, you took advantage or whatever. We did the same thing we did every day, but I felt good that these people were crying at our counter. And so it's a business that's actually needed in the community. And we're to the point now that we're one zone away from being kicked out of a community. We talked about the landscaping, and one thing I would tell you, so you guys vote on this on Thursday. I would recommend you guys look at our Google reviews in all the cities that we are in. Just Google Green Acre Storage, Ankeny, Waterloo, Dubuque, and I think you're going to see what type of a company we are. And you're going to see half of our reviews are about our staff, and the other half are about our facility, how nice it is. And I think this will give you a basis of what type of business you could potentially have in your community. So the next slide. So when I talk about that, we try to go with the planning departments and, you know, work with them. This is our Dubuque facility. We're right on the Northwest Arterial. That's Dubuque's kind of new area, their show area. And one of the things we did here is we put brick on the outside, because Dubuque is one of the oldest, or it is the oldest city in Iowa. And a lot of the buildings downtown were brick. So we wanted to implement that onto our site. So we try to fit into every city. You can see the landscaping in the background. This was when it was very young, when it was new, but I can tell you I've got 250 reed grass on there, the native grasses, which really looks nice. We have tons of trees, and it really looks nice. The next slide. So this gives you a basis of where we're actually at. So we're right on the Northwest Arterial. This is their main, you know, road through the town. But if you look at the overview of this, we're around all the other businesses. McGrath has a Volkswagen dealership right kind of diagonal behind us. There's Goodwill. Aldi's is right next to us. There's Holiday Inn Express. but then we're only about 500 feet away from a residential neighborhood. This is our perfect setup for us. This is what we like to see, because 75% of our people, customers come from residents. So we want to be close to them. They want the convenience. The next slide. This is our Waterloo location. And I think one of the council members actually drove through this area and I believe said nice things about it. And I don't know which one it was, but this is our actual facility in Waterloo. The next slide. And this kind of gives you an overview here. I just kind of want to show you how we fit into any city, but this is actually in a technology park. So we fit, lots of people come in and they don't even know what we are there. They go, what do you do in this building? They don't realize it's storage. They think it's an office building. I had a staff member that started working for me that a friend of hers drove by this facility and said, oh, I seen you guys as headquarters. They thought it was an office building. They thought we were some huge corporation and that we had 200 employees, which was not the case. This is actually storage. And then if you look, there's residents about 500 foot from there too. The next slide. And this is our latest one that we did. We did this 2 years ago. This is our Ankeny facility. And if you look in the background, there's condominiums. So we're positioned right next to a residential neighborhood. These condos are about $350,000. And we coexist with I think any commercial area we would coexist, and we can be right next to a residential neighborhood. All the neighbors are very happy with us. We're a very low impact industry. The next slide. And once again, this is an overview, and Ankeny is really developing, so Google is a little behind, but our facility isn't on there. There's a Quick Star right next to us, a Jimmy John's. There's another strip mall that's actually been put in there. We have some doctor's offices next to us. So I just kind of wanted you to see that the areas that we currently have and what other cities have done for their zoning. And I believe we fit in very well in almost any area. The next slide. This kind of shows you a typical office, and I wanted to show you an unloading bay. So all of our customers would unload in an actual building. No one would see it from the outside, and I think that's a huge plus. And I can tell you it's a huge plus with the weather that we're having right now when it's 10 or 15 below zero. Our customers love us. They pull inside, it's all heated, taken care of. They don't have to slip and slide on the snow and ice. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what a typical office in an unloading bay would look like. And the next slide. This is our Marion location. We've been here since 2007. I've never heard a complaint about us. I don't think that the city has either, but I am proud of what I have here. I truly am. And I feel like we fit in any neighborhood. The next slide. So this will be the overview of this. We're right next to the Grant Wood Trail. That's in our backyard. And then those residential houses are there. So, part of this discussion should be that, why did this zoning change? Why were we zoned out? Why weren't we allowed in the BR district? And I think that, that's a discussion that needs to be had. But I don't know of any complaint in your city. And if you do know of something, I would love to know what it is and try to correct it. The next slide. So changing the zoning, I keep getting this, and at the planning commission, I think all of them were actually for the project, but on the zoning, they changed the comprehensive plan. I believe they approved that to open the door, because most of them said that they would not let the rezoning go through unless they accommodated us. I believe a lot of them were for this project and couldn't believe that there was even a discussion about it. I think the planning department can probably share some of the takes on it, or I believe there's a recording on it that you could listen to it, but it went on for about, I think it was 2 hours, I believe. But it's one of those things that we fit in any area. I would fit in an industrial area easily, but that's not our ideal situation. I would not put a storage place in an industrial park where no one is there on the weekend. I don't believe it's a safe environment for customers to go out by themselves, because you have to put your mindset with that, okay, you have, it's your wife or your daughter or somebody is going to go pick up a few items from your storage unit, and it's in an industrial park where nobody is at on the weekend. I would not feel secure or safe in that environment. But if I'm on a main road and lots of cars going by, I believe I feel very safe. And that's why we chose this location, because you know, high visibility is where we feel we have the best security, and that's what our customers are after. The design fits in any neighborhood. As you can see with the other locations that we have, we would fit in as a high-end office or in a commercial district or even in a residential area. So one of the comments that we've gotten from the planning is, you know, this is the gateway to the Marion and they don't want a storage. Well, this isn't your typical storage. This is, you know, a new concept. And I don't want to say it's a new concept because it's been in the bigger cities for 10, 15 years. But it's probably new to Marion. The other, you know, like Des Moines probably has 10 of these now. And I'll show you a slide on that in just a little bit. But when I read through the descriptions of all these things, I believe we would fit in any one of them. And the biggest thing that we need is we need a guarantee that we can exist after we get it built. You know, we truly want to build this, and that's the path we're going down, and we're allowed to do it right now. But we want some assurance that we can, if we would have another storm, and that's, you know, on the minds of everybody now that we've had this and everybody's gone through it, that we've got to have some guarantee of some sort. So that's what I'm asking you, and you can be for this project or against it. And the other comment that we've heard is, and I don't understand it, but the planning has always said there's a better use for this land. And I'm not sure what that means, and hopefully they can explain that statement. The next slide. So self-storage aligns with commercial definitions of the BR district and the household. Our customers desire convenience. They want to be within 3 miles of their storage unit, or it has to maybe be on the pathway of when they go home from work. Like I said before, 1 in 10 households use it. And they, at some point, probably 50, 60% of the residents have used self-storage. The next slide. So now I'll get into the meat and potatoes of the zoning. So if you look at the current zoning is on your left. The property A is currently zone C3. The updated zoning map, which they're going to try to present, they actually changed that to industrial, to A. So with that said, our lot is across the road from it. I don't think this is a very big step to even change this. To me, this is a simple, just turning it a different color. But they did it on one property, but they don't want to do it on this property. So then you take B, that is actually industrial, and now they're changing it to the BR. And then if you take all of C was industrial, and they're changing it to the BR. I think if you asked 100 residents that drove by that corner, I guarantee you probably 99 of them will say, I think that if you asked them, what do you think the zoning is on that corner? I would say 99 of them probably say that's Marion's industrial park. And at one time, Marion was super proud of that industrial park. That was going to be where, you know, development went and stuff like that. when you look at this map on the left, there's two properties that were zone C3. To me, the simple solution would have been making it industrial and have that whole area be industrial and be super, super proud of it. The next slide. The future land map general guidelines. So if you read through this, you know, the land use plan is intended to be a general guide to growth and development within the Marion, and it's not a development plan of rigid and finite recommendations. This plan allows for individual negotiations and considerations, creative approaches to land development. So that opens the door to, you know, a new creative approach. And if you think this is a new type of industry, that probably fits in that definition. The next slide. So now the future land map use. So this was what on the left was kind of the roadmap for Marion. So, and then I have the current map on the right. So if you take a look at item A, it followed it exactly. And if you take a look at C, it went from the future map, what the roadmap was that was done 10 or 15 years ago was supposed to be C3, but it's actually industrial. Then section B is the business park office was what it was supposed to be, but it ended up being industrial on the current zoning map. So even the current zoning doesn't follow like the future land map use. The next slide. So if you look at property C, so now this is the future map is on one side and the updated zoning map is on the other. And I made a mistake on this. On A, that's correct. So it's taking it from C3 to the BR district. The B should have been business park office, but it's going to industrial, or it's currently industrial and it's going to stay at industrial. But the property C that I talked about before was C3, but they're taking that to industrial. So it's just across the road that all of that on C, it's actually to the top part of that C on the right-hand map is also industrial. So that's right next to Walmart, and they're changing that from C3 to industrial. So our property A, I don't think this is a huge hurdle to make that happen because other properties right on that same road it's happening the same way. The next slide. So this kind of gives you about the industry. This is prospective, planned, and under construction. This is a map we put together in the Des Moines market. I can tell you West Des Moines has two multi-story. You know, I think maybe some of Marion is that they want a nicer looking city. West Des Moines is a very nice looking city, probably one of the highest end cities in Iowa. And I can tell you right now, there's two projects that are finished. And I gave you the addresses for all of these on the next slide that show what the address is, and you can look it up yourself. Between now and the time you need to vote on it, I think it would be interesting to see, but I did some quick adding here. So there's 15 projects in the Des Moines area. All of these cities welcome and embrace self-storage. It's just a necessity in every city. It's something that your residents want, and it's a service that you should provide them. But the planning department has taken a completely different opposite approach, and we want to get rid of them. But in Des Moines, I just calculated just these 15 projects, it'll bring in about $1.6 million in property taxes, and every one of these facilities pay 1% sales tax. I don't know if the council knows that we're the only industry for property. So if you rent an apartment, you don't pay sales tax. If you rent a business property, you don't pay sales tax. If you rent a house, you don't pay sales tax. But on self-storage, it's actually taxed. I can tell you our current facility in Marion, we pay $136,000 in property taxes, and we give the city of Marion $100,000 in 1% sales tax every year. So this new project, we're anticipating you're going to receive about 180,000 in property taxes, no TIF involved, not 10 years like most of the projects I see go through, and you'll get 1%. So you'll get 20% of local option tax that can go directly to all the projects that Marion dreams about and help the community. And, it's just a win-win on tax-wise. The next slide. So these are all the addresses. Just take a little time, that's all I ask, and just look at where these are located in this city. And then I think the conversation should be, why did this change? Because if we were allowed in the BR district, I wouldn't even be here tonight. But I'm trying to make this project work for me. And I feel like I'm in the fight of my life. And I've never, ever had this in any community. Most of the planning departments are just tickled to death. I can tell you an example in Waterloo. They were head over heels about our project. They wanted it. They didn't care where it went because that city needs everything they can get. And they accommodated us. And we also made a nice, well-developed project for them. So the next slide. So the summary. Somehow we've got to get to the path that guarantees our ability to maintain this facility. So it can be that you direct the council has the authority to direct the planning department to accommodate us in the BR district, make it a conditional use. All these other cities don't, not only do they allow the climate control like we're proposing, but they also have just the regular self-storage facilities that you see. It doesn't matter if it's on 7th Avenue in an industrial park, my existing one here in Marion, they allow that in every part of their city. Marion's the only one that, that we found that does not in these cities this size. The land map use says it's flexible. And as I showed you on that slideshow, that the property right across the road, they're changing from C3 to industrial, but mine, they want to keep it BR. So there's flexibility there. I don't think this, when they change that zoning, it set precedents that it's okay to make this change from C3 to industrial. So I think that's all I have. I would love to answer your questions. And hopefully I'll have a chance to give input at the council meeting. We decided to do it here versus the council meeting on Thursday. Hopefully that wasn't a mistake.
So thank you. Appreciate your taking the time to present. At the council meeting, there typically is not an opportunity for people to weigh in during council discussion and voting on an item. There is a time at the beginning of the meeting that is open for comments on items that are on the agenda but not part of a public hearing. So unless it's a public hearing, which it's not.
Nope, and I can do the public, on the public hearing part of it, if there's any questions or anything. I would love to have questions now if you have any for me.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead with questions now if anyone has questions for Mr. Green. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Steve Jensen. Mr. Green, this is, I'm the individual that went up to Waterloo to look at your facility up there.
Oh, awesome.
And I mean, I think your presentation was well done, but the crux of your issue is your kind of facility, storage facility, going to be allowed in the BR zoning? And I know there are, at least I've gone on record already, that if I was not in favor of the storage facility with the outside buildings, but again, I'm on record to say that I certainly am in favor of the facility as you are proposing to be in the BR district and be on that corner. I think it'll look very good, something that the city can use. So I think what you're asking about is, I don't think anybody has any concern about the quality of your project. I think we all feel that the quality of the building is there, that it'll be run very well. It's just a matter of whether it should be done, under what zoning it should be done. And again, my opinion is it should be done under the BR zoning.
Yep, and that's one of the things that was the question with the planning commission. You know, that we're allowed to build it under this, but there's no guarantee. So I've waited 3 months to see if they were going to accommodate it in the BR district. But without some guarantee, this was another path that we could take. And I believe that I show that, you know, in industrial zoning, I've driven by that corner for years, and I always thought it was part of the industrial park. I think that Marion should be proud of that corner, and I would just zone it all industrial. And everything that goes out there is probably going to be something that would be able to go in that. So, but that's, you know, just my thoughts. I just want my project, and I want to be guaranteed, and that's what I'm after.
We appreciate that you want to do a project here. I think as Steve said, the issue is not whether anyone thinks this building is not going to be appropriate, or it's not going to be run well, or it's not going to be a good addition to the city. I don't think that's a question at all. As I understood it, is the planning department's concern is that if this corner they don't believe should be industrial, and if they rezone it to industrial for this project, you mentioned yourself there could be another derecho or storm tomorrow, and then if it has been rezoned commercial or industrial, then that opens the door for other uses that are industrial on that corner, which our planning department doesn't believe that should be industrial. I think they have expressed to us, at least as I understand, is that they fully support this use in the BR district, and then that is in the process of happening. Maybe Tom can inform us more on it later when we have the discussion, but that's been my understanding. And I think you shouldn't at all think that anybody's trying to drive you out of the community. I want to try to understand a little bit more your comment on you're one zone away from being kicked out of the community. I'm not sure I understood that, but in any case, I think that's been my understanding, is that the planning department is fully supportive of this use being allowed in the BR district.
Okay, yep, and that's what
the zoning, the rezoning or to a industrial use is much bigger than this project. It's a concern about, it's a bigger issue.
Yep, and I understand that. That was one of the things that was brought up at the Planning Commission. When I said about we're one zone away from out, we're only allowed in the industrial zoning under the current what's proposed. It hasn't been passed. So that's where you guys have have to give the planning department guidance. You know, I talked to Nick Liu with the Medco, and he said, you know, you have to try to get the commissioners to direct the planning department to allow it in the BR district, whether it's a conditional thing, whether it's straight up. I'm okay with people or, you know, developers bringing a project and trying to get approval. If they have a well thought out project, most council members would go for a project like this, and we understand that. And they did address that part that, you know, what could this be? Let's say we did it blew down. I don't know what the statistics are with zoning of cities, but I imagine this new zoning will last 15 to 20 years. And then the city will go through another zoning change, because as time changed, there's new maybe ideas and whatnot. So I would imagine if you zoned it industrial, in 20 years, the city's probably going to redo what they're doing now and change it again. So we have to look in the 20-year window. So hopefully, if it blows down and I build there, I'm going to rebuild it. That's what I'm after. That's what I want, the guarantee that I can rebuild and I don't have to sell it. And I don't think this corner, no manufacturer is going to build on that corner for what the land is going to cost when they're giving land free in the back, or where, you know, or at a discounted rate. They're not going to pay top dollar for a corner and then manufacture batteries or something.
Okay, I wanted to see if anyone else has questions for you before we move on.
Sure.
Anyone else have questions?
Your Honor.
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Seth, this is Grant Harper speaking. I'm remote this evening. So I want to follow on from Steve Jensen's comment. You have certainly presented to us in a very comprehensive way the details and your viewpoints on the justification for your project. And there's no doubt that you've conveyed that it is a quality project, and you've emphasized the value that it will provide into the community. So I think in terms of the informational base, you've covered off on that quite nicely. I would just say that I'm in favor of the project as well, so long as it is inclusive in a BR designation. And so I think that is going to be the pivot point of our discussion on Thursday, with the information as a backdrop that you've presented this evening. So I just wanted to share my perspective on how I'll be looking at this going forward. In all honesty, I would have to say I think we have a sufficient abundance of information that will inform our discussion on Thursday.
Perfect. I appreciate your comments.
Anyone else have questions? Will? Randy? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Green.
Perfect. Thank you very much for letting me present.
Okay. Have a nice evening.
You too.
Okay, moving on under the consent agenda, well, I guess the pavement management program is not marked for discussion. Does anyone have questions on that? Yes, so we're gonna have a presentation on Thursday, okay. Yeah. Then the consent agenda, items A1 through A5 are not marked. Any discussion? Any questions on those? Okay, A6.
Your Honor, a quick intro into a project we're working on, which is designating the YMCA old site as an urban revitalization area. Yep, thank you. Just a quick distinction between tax abatements and rebate. We've done both. Both are used as incentives to stimulate development. Tax abatements reduce the overall tax and always are set for a specific time period. And rebate works in a form of a refund. So developer would pay their taxes and they'll be refunded a percentage. There are situations where the abatement would seems more appropriate than the rebate, which is we used to do in the form of tax increment financing. We are designating the urban revitalization area to be able to support a project and providing an incentive in the form of tax abatement. In theory, both incentives work really well in incentivizing development and add to the tax base after the time period falls off. Iowa Code Chapter 404 regulates urban revitalization. And the code is intended to encourage development and redevelopment and revitalization within designated areas by authorizing the use of property tax as incentives for development. Could you forward, Terrell? And generally, cities, when they set an urban revitalization area, they'll be looking for two main goals. One is to rehabilitate or redevelop an underdeveloped area, and also to promote high quality development that also help with accomplishing a broader goal in the community, such as filling a gap in housing, for example. Cheryl, could you pass? To be able to designate an area, that area has to meet specific criteria set in the code. One, it has to meet the definition of being an economic development area. And also two, the revitalization area has to be appropriate for public improvements related to housing and residential development or construction of housing, whether it's a regular residential development or a multifamily housing. Third is that the project itself has to be in the public interest, or has to be in the benefit of the broader community or the immediate district that is being designated. The project we're looking into, please forward, Terrell, is the Green Park project. Has met all those criteria. The area does fall under the overall urban renewal area of the Central Corridor, and it's intended for a development of a multi-housing project. So we'll be coming back to council on designating this area as an urban revitalization area to be able to provide incentive in the form of tax abatement to support the project. The project does serve the community in the form of filling a very much needed need for multi-family housing. That's it for intro. If you have any question, I'll be happy to answer.
I'm going to turn over the meeting to the Deputy Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Amal? Okay, thank you, Amal.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions or discussion on items A7 through E1 at the end of page 3? All right, moving on to pages 4 and 5. Nothing is marked on those pages for discussion by staff. Any questions or discussion on any of those items? Okay, we'll move on then to, under regular agenda, A1 is marked for discussion. Public hearing on a proposal to enter into an essential purpose loan agreement. Is that Amal again?
Yes, Your Honor. So on Thursday, we'll be holding a public hearing on proposed general obligation series 2021 AB. Typically, we start the process of our annual debt issuance around February timeframe. Terrell, if you proceed, I will go over the calendar. This is a typical calendar we have for such action. On a Thursday, we are planning on holding a meeting with Moody's to discuss our rating before issuance. And Thursday, we'll be holding the public hearing and we'll be authorizing our purpose statement of the project and setting a sale date for March 4th. February 25th, we'll publish that purpose statement. We'll distribute that to our potential buyers. March 4th is going to be the sale date. At council meeting, we'll be presenting and verifying bids and recommending the winning bid. March 18th, council meeting will adopt authorizing a resolution, and March 19th to the end of the month, we'll be preparing and finalize documents for a closing on April 1st. Cheryl, if you advance. So this series has two components. One is 2021A is new monies. That's a bond, par estimated at 7.4 million. This is a 20-year bond, will be supported by debt service levy. And the second component is 2021B. This is a refund of existing series 2014C. This is an urban renewal bond, will be supported by debt service as well as TIF. If you advance, Terrell, please. In terms of debt capacity, right now we are at 63.3 million in debt. If we add what we are proposing for 2021A, 7.4 plus the refunding and the minus the refunded series will put us at 7.7 million. And that's at, we will be at 45% of our legal capacity. If you include the 20 million we're setting aside as capacity for line of credit related to the ratio project, we will end up by the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, we'll end up at 90.7 million. That's still a 58% of our capacity. That would still leave us at 66.4 in remaining capacity. Terrell, if you could advance, please. This is just a list of our existing series. Bottom 2021A added will bring total 54.3. This is debt backed by debt service levy. Please, Terrell, one slide. This is the list of this series that are backed by TIF. Total 16.4, including the proposed 2021 refunding. Total 70.7 million expected. The debt we're issuing or proposing next council would be to support capital projects. Two significant projects included in the list is the library project and the 7th Avenue improvement project. I think that's it. Terrell, if you advance. If you have any questions regarding the general publication series.
Questions for Emma?
Amal, Grant here. Is it possible that we see somewhat of a change over time? Let's say for the past 5 years or so, a change in our the level of our approved debt. I think this brings us to 58%, but how has that changed over time? I'm just kind of curious about that as we examine this kind of a matter, as we consider it now and go forward.
We'll definitely have this prepared for you for the next meeting. 58% of capacity, this is just expected, including the 20 we're setting aside. This is just, this is not an actual debt, it's the capacity we're setting aside for the line of credit. So we are still at 45% after this debt is issued. But I can definitely show you over time how much we've been committed, our capacity.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Any other questions on this? Okay. A4.
Therefore, Your Honors, staff received an application for financial assistance from Rookwood, 4th edition, asking for the city's support. Developer is going to apply for a state workforce tax credit. That application will require local support. Staff will be recommending giving the minimum, which is $1,000 a unit. The development is expected to add 96 residential units. The economic development team reviewed the application and found that support is appropriate, and they'll be recommending city back and support that application.
So what was some of the reasoning for the support of the application? I mean, this is single family housing.
This is the multi-family housing.
Multi-family.
So the state program is designed to incentivize workforce housing. So designed to support such developments throughout the Iowa communities, but it will require local support.
Yeah, any other questions on this one? Okay, A5.
Yes, so this is Brian McKenzie, so Mayor and members of the council. As you may be aware, we have been cash flowing the ratio expenditures out of the Capital Projects Fund. And so far to date, we have, the end of January, we have expended about $15.6 million. So that has decreased our fund balance in the Capital Projects Fund to about 13.6 million. So with that, some of those dollars are actually not only cash, they are in some investments. So because of the timeline with the FEMA reimbursements and with the temporary line of credit that we are close to securing, we have decided that the best course of action would be to make some temporary transfers from our reserve funds. So the proposal is to transfer $2 million from each of the reserve funds that you see here: equipment reserve, road use replacement, and sanitary sewer replacement. And this would really just secure in the short term that the available cash in the Capital Projects Fund stays positive. So then after, when the cash flow stabilizes, we do expect that we're hoping that within the next month or two, we will see the first project from FEMA, which would be about $11 million come back into the Capital Projects Fund. And then we obviously hope to minimize the use of our temporary financing to reduce our interest costs. But in the short term, this would be sufficient to see us through, so we get some more certainty regarding the FEMA reimbursements. I can take any questions.
Any questions? Is that pretty clear to everybody?
Yeah. Your Honor, I have one
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
And this may be more for Amal, since she's been tracking our FEMA reimbursements. Do we have any expectation of increasing risk that FEMA will be delayed in, or abnormally delayed in making reimbursements to us over time?
We have not heard anything regarding delays, but we do know that because of the size of our projects, they're multi-million-dollar projects. So those triggers congressional review, and we don't really have a good idea on the time frame it takes for that process. But the first project we've submitted passed FEMA, state approved, we reviewed it, and it was sent to Congress for review. We were told it takes 6 to 8 weeks for that process, but also it's going to depend on their agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Mayor, I have a question. This is Randy.
go ahead, Randy.
Thank you. Brian, can you tell us what kind of an impact would we have on those 3 accounts if we, let's see, what's the better way to ask this question? Will we have any short-term impacts on those particular accounts if we run into a further delay yet from FEMA?
Well, we do have the temporary line of credit that will be closing. So in the short term, we're not estimating these funds to be used to this capacity. If it turned out that FEMA was further delayed, and obviously this is a month-by-month process that we will be keeping an eye on this. So this is really just a 1 to 2 month temporary time frame. We are hoping that the cash flow from FEMA can then, once that stabilizes, then we can get this funds back in there. But there is also the option of the temporary line of credit. We're trying not to use that as much, but that will be there if it's absolutely essential to reimburse these funds. Then the temporary line of credit would take over.
I will add
Great.
also
Brian, I appreciate that.
I will add that those funds are totally under our control. Equipment reserve fund is set for scheduled annual replacement for our equipment, as well as the road use replacement. So we have projects committed for those use of those funds. However, those are still under our control. We can manage.
That answer your question, Randy?
Yes, it did. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, move on to A6, please.
Good evening again, or it's evening now. Next slide, if you could, Tara. Just a quick overview on the FY22 maximum property tax levy. Next slide, Tara. It had been mentioned previously to City Council that in 2019, there was a new law that established this maximum property tax levy. All cities in Iowa have to go through this process, whether or not you exceed the 2% set forth by the state. Just wanted to reiterate that 2% is a number set forth by the state, not tied to any inflationary numbers for the city of Marion. So it's the same number across all jurisdictions. It requires a 2/3 vote of City Council to exceed the 2%. And then lastly, it sets the ceilings for property tax levies for this coming budget year. Next slide, Tara. So looking at the timeline, we are near the end of the timeline. On Thursday, there's set up a public hearing. Gives the public an opportunity to ask questions about that maximum property tax levy. As of this date, I have not received any inquiries on it. And if you can go to the next slide, Tara. If you brought your Superman glasses, you might be able to read that. Fortunately, I printed this out because there's no way I can read that. But what it establishes once again is a certain number of the tax levies are under the requirements for or under the purview of this 2% maximum property tax levy. The sum number we're really looking at is the annual change is 8.17%. That's once again what was placed in there at the recommendation of staff in order to provide significant capacity in the event something happened at the state. Currently where we're looking to publish it just with these areas would be closer to a little over 5%. And that's due to our increase once again in year over year of our property tax valuation. So if we were to, just a reminder once again, if we were to leave this on the table, we're talking, or if we were to publish at the 2%, we're talking over $500,000 that we would not be moving forward with property taxes for this next year. And then cuts would have to be made in order to move that forward. So this has already been published. Once again, the hearing will take place on Thursday. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
A7 through C1 on page 7 are not marked for discussion. Any questions or discussion on those? Okay, under parks, we have one item marked. Resolution approving a contract regarding Falks Heritage Woods salvage timber sale.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you. This is Mike Simprich. I'm the arborist with the Parks Department. We just closed receiving proposals today, and we received one from B&R Logging out of Monticello. They are the same contractor that's working with Lynn County and some other organizations in the area. And we're looking to make the recommendation to select that vendor and have a contract prepared for Thursday.
Okay. Any questions? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, Mike, can you explain? So it says 40% cut of gross sales. Is that what the city gets? So it's a 60-40 split?
It is a 60-40 split, Steve, but the 40% goes back to the vendor, B&R Logging. The 60 percentage would go to the city.
Okay.
And that's the total sum of what will most likely be a series of sales as materials managed and staged.
Okay.
Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, Grant Harper here. Just can you describe the criticality of getting this area cleaned up in terms of having a lot of deadfall remain in the area? I think that's a useful point of understanding.
Yes, absolutely. The current condition of the woodland, for anyone who hasn't seen it or been there, is very similar to what the community looked like immediately following the storm, with the exception of roadways and things like that. It's, to say the least, fairly impassable. We spend a lot of time with volunteer groups and nonprofit organizations working to maintain the natural status of this woodland. And with somewhere around a 50 percentile canopy loss and all that material resting either on the woodland floor or partially hung up or snug in that area, it creates somewhat of a safety hazard as well as an extreme challenge to get in and access the area, not only for the public to use or enjoy the value of, but also for city personnel and staff to do any type of management or improvements in that area. The particular property being a natural area with extremely limited improvements does not qualify for FEMA reimbursement for any of those types of cleanup or debris clearance process. So the best other option that we have to take some activity and do some active work over there is to try to utilize some of the materials from the property and the value they hold to offset that cost of going in and doing debris clearance.
Thanks for that additional context on why it's important to get that cleaned up.
Okay, other questions? So the money received by the city will be used to offset the expense of the cleanup?
there-
Is that what you said?
That's correct. There will be no initial cost. It will just be the 40% of the overall log sales will be paid over to the logging contractor.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, on to engineering. First item is not marked for discussion. Any questions on that? E2 is marked.
Terrell, one more slide.
Mike Barcelo? Okay.
Terrell, can you go one more slide for me, please? There you go. So this is the first application that we have gotten for the major streets oversizing. So as you may or may not recall, the city of Marion standard residential street is 26 foot wide, 7-inch thick. We pay above and beyond that if it's required. Also, we only pay for 4 foot wide, 4-inch thick sidewalk. So if we want a trail or a multi-purpose pathway or side path, we pay the difference between those. And so with this in their request, you can see that's in there, it's included in your council packet. They're asking for almost $62,000. This was a new policy that we put into effect so that we would get them and bring them before council so you can see the money that's being spent. And we have $150,000 per year that's allocated towards this program.
Okay, questions? All right, E3.
So SUDAS is our standards specifications that we use. So E3 is actually adopting the new set of specifications. E4 is our supplemental specifications that are to the city of Marion. Those would be things like fire hydrants, streetlights, things that we want customized to us. And then the E5 is the modifications to the design standards so that those are designed to meet Marion specs. So this is something we do every year to update our specifications.
Questions for Mike on this one?
Yes, Your Honor, Grant here.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so Mike, in essence, asking for our approval of this adoption, this is just keeping us then in sync with the balance of the state and how they view the specifications need to be managed with ongoing revisions and corrections.
Correct. So that's what E3 is. E4 and E5 would be customizable just to the city of Marion. But the SUDAS for a while, we did use the Cedar Rapids Metropolitan Standards. And since then, both ourselves and the city of Cedar Rapids and the other metros have converted to SUDAS. That way it makes things more on a level playing field rather than having Cedar Rapids with a set of specs and the rest of the state another set. This opens it up so it's more universal. That's why they call it the statewide urban design and specifications program.
All right, thank you.
Other questions for Mike on E3?
And if we didn't go so long, I'd read you many pages of it. But those of you that know, this is about a 4-inch thick book and there's 2 of them.
Yeah, I'm sure Grant will volunteer to read those and summarize them for us.
Thanks for the humor.
Okay, items E4 through F1 are not marked. Any questions on those? Okay, F2. Tom?
Yes, so before us this evening and on Thursday will be a resolution approving the Central Corridor review for the Market Fresh proposed on 7th Avenue. You guys have seen the staff report, and Dave did a very nice job of working through that. The project was reviewed for consistency with the Central Corridor review and meets all of the standards as identified. I would point out that they're probably getting ready to start the zoning board of adjustment meeting this evening relative to the pumps in this district. They require a conditional use permit, so that'll be forwarded. So we'll have an answer on that before Thursday, but I wanted to point that out. But the Planning Commission did recommend approval of this as well.
Okay. Questions, comments? All right, F3.
So I think I've identified this project, and if I didn't, Mr. Green walked through a lot of it earlier this evening. You know, one of the biggest things I think to point out in the proposed comp plan amendment and rezoning of the corner of 151 and 13 is that we have been consistent in messaging to Mr. Green that the council directed us to include self-storage, indoor self-storage in the BR district. We proceeded to amend or proceeded to research that, and we're going to be presenting information here in a minute on it, and that we would not support the zoning moving forward. The Planning Commission listened to the same presentation that Mr. Green provided earlier this evening. They did recommend approval of the comp plan amendment. However, they did not support recommending that the rezoning be brought forward. So that's kind of where that stands at this point. So we have a comp plan amendment that was recommended for approval and a rezoning request that was not recommended for approval. There'll be a public hearing on this on Thursday, and opportunity for Mr. Green to speak again, and then also for questions if there are of the council, and clearly the public would be able to speak as well. There was a very detailed staff report. Staff is recommending that the BRD district be amended to allow self-storage. So I guess we're questioning why to proceed. Additionally, it's just it's been a long drawn out process. So we're hoping to get some resolve to it as well. And I'll just leave it at that. Any questions?
Questions?
Your Honor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom, I guess with the recommendation from staff that we include self-storage in the BR designation, pardon me if I'm not saying it exactly in your lingo, but that would be wherever there is BR designated in the city, that would then permit self-storage in those areas citywide?
The way we are proposing it is that the self-storage, the interior self-storage would be a permitted use in the BR district. Correct. And I believe that is the way that the council directed us back in November to do that. And the contention we've had is that it takes a long time to amend a code. We've got a lot going on. And so the use is a permitted use right now, so.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying is if our preferred solution is that it's included, wholly enclosed self-storage in the BR. I'm just wanting to clarify that wherever there is a BR designation within our municipality, it's everywhere, not just on this corner or this intersection.
That's correct.
Okay, and then one last question. If we were to enact the M1, that would be viewed as spot zoning?
Yeah, I mean, enacting the manufacturing district here, it provides for a spot zoning. It's got commercial is to the east and to the south. It opens the door for the whole area to be, rezoned to industrial, which we would prefer not to occur.
So I think I heard the operable words is it would be spot zoning, which would be problematic. So, okay, you've answered my questions. Thank you.
So back to your statement, Tom, that it takes a while to change the code. What are we looking at in terms of?
Well, I mean, it's an ordinance, so the ordinance needs to be amended. I've got a couple questions for the council this evening and a presentation coming up. If those questions are easily answered, we'll hopefully be able to bring this forward to the Planning Commission next month. If there are some changes to that, we may need to do a little more digging and provide additional provisions for design standards, which I think are going to be important if we want to see self-storage in other commercial districts. So, I mean, that's where we're trying to head to. So Planning Commission next month and then council for 3 readings is how that works. What we have indicated is that we would not proceed unless the council directed us to the rezoning of this area or this ward until we identified and provided for this remedy, so that we would not be in a situation where we're pushing zoning on this property ahead of his development. So we've been pretty clear about that for months now.
Okay, other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I know we've had discussions about including the kind of facility that Mr. Green is proposing in the BR district, but has City Council formally directed staff to include it in the BR zoning district when that is rezoned?
There was a directive, I believe, in late November, beginning of December, to move forward with an ordinance that provides for the BR. I don't have the exact language, but that was certainly identified by council. That's why we proceeded in the manner that we have.
Okay, so I want to make sure that, I mean, I'm not sure, I can't speak for how the vote's going to go on Thursday, but if it is not approved in the manner currently that Mr. Green wants, that at least at this time, City Council has directed staff to make that change.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Any other discussion on this item? Okay, so Tom, does this discussion cover the what rest of these, or I guess?
Yes, down to the final plat.
You have F8 marked, yeah.
Yeah. Item number 8 is the final plat relative to Mr. Green's property on the corner there. He has requested that this be removed, and so it will not be on the agenda on Thursday.
So this item will not be on the agenda?
Correct. Per his request.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions then for Tom on the Green Acres matter? Further clarifications before Thursday? Okay, we'll move on to other department discussions. Item number 1 is marked.
Okay, so as as is identified, and as we've kind of talked through this evening, what I wanted to do was be able to walk through with the council kind of where we are in reviewing the ordinance associated with self-storage. So currently, as been indicated, we don't have a definition for interior self-storage or interior access as self-storage. And so that was one of the major issues that was brought forward. Was Mr. Green was proposing a project that really wasn't something that we had seen in the area. And to that point, I have looked at a few other ordinances, and I know he's identified a few codes that he's been working with. I also have looked at codes, and West Des Moines was one that has recently allowed exterior or interior access self-storage in some of their commercial districts, and as has Ames in the last few years. So this isn't something that other communities have not went through in their past as well. It's a unique use. I think some communities, view it differently than others, and that's the prerogative of the city council and how you manage your local municipality. What I'd like to do is just kind of walk through where we are. We're redefining I think in our current code, we call it mini warehouse. I did reach out and kind of looked into the actual self-storage industry, and I've tried to align the definitions with their industry, which I always find to be helpful. And so these are the two definitions that we're moving forward with as it relates to exterior and interior self-storage. If you can move to the next slide. As I identified, we got the BR district and the manufacturing districts. And I got a map later that'll illustrate the areas that these include. We've got what we are proposing as staff is that self-storage exterior access be permitted in the manufacturing districts. Outdoor storage would be accessory to those. We haven't really talked much about that, but that's something that comes up when you talk about storage. And then that self-storage interior access would be permitted in the BR district and the M1, M2 district. So at this point, we're proposing that goes through as a permitted use, not a conditional use. We are, however, not recommending that we move forward with self-storage exterior access in the BR district, which I know will not sit well with some folks, but that's how we are proposing that to move forward. Next slide. So as it relates to what we want to see with the exterior access self-storage, so because it's located in industrial districts, we're not providing for an extreme amount of design standards or design review associated with that. As an industrial use, we don't feel like it needs to have too many standards, but there are a few. Just to start off with, we're just kind of outlining what exterior access self-storage is, and I think everybody knows, so I'm not going to read that. What we're trying to do is deflect the view of exterior doors to the public street and to residential areas or commercially developed areas. Outdoor storage areas should be so a lot of times you have outdoor storage associated with exterior access storage, so boats, campers, trailers, what have you. What we're saying is that those should all be contained in one specific area, would be reviewed as a part of the site plan and not just everywhere. Fencing would be needed to be provided and shall be maintained, and that the units or the storage facility should not exceed the height of the fence except in certain circumstances, and that fencing should not be closer to the front yard line than the building, and that the fencing should consist of something that is other than uncoated chain link fence. So the silver galvanized chain link fence would not be provided for, and that all storage and driving surfaces shall be of a hard surface nature. So next slide, please. So additionally, we're looking at providing for some roof pitch so that we don't get flat roofs. Some of the older storage has flat roofs. I don't think many of the new modern facilities are providing for that. I don't think they last as long, but maybe I'm wrong on that. Additionally, we want to ensure that appropriate drive aisles within the units are provided for. And so we will have some standards in the code relative to that. So we're not looking for a great deal of review or other specific design standards related to exterior access storage as something new. So, but I would point out that, next slide, as we move into interior, let me back up a little bit. So this is just as a point, this is a plan that's currently sitting on our desks in the planning department and building department right now. This is the corner of 3rd Avenue and 44th Street. You can see the units are in the long barrack style. They're screened and buffered with landscaping. This does have exterior doors towards the public frontage. That's not what we would definitely want to see that in the event of a commercial district. And so there is a portion of this that does have some storage that I don't believe it's proposed as hard surface. I haven't reviewed the details of this plan, but it looks to me as though it's gravel. So I just point out that this is this is a typical storage facility that we see. And I think if you go across the street in a little to the west, you'll see one similar to this. We've got numerous ones up and down Highway 13 that are similar, 1 acre, or they're probably less than an acre inside. So, obviously what we would like to see is something of a little better, higher design standard if in fact this was going to be opened up into a commercial district. This land use and this site design, I think is fine in an industrial district. It's just, as you move into a commercial district, I don't think this is what we really want to see along the new 6th Avenue, Tower Terrace Road, or any of our major arterials of the north part or the south part of the community. Next slide. So moving into the new use, interior access self-storage, you can see that this type of building is intended to allow for facilities where all units are accessed by interior hallways. The structures shall emulate the exterior architecture and characters of buildings in the specific district which facility is located, and the following standards shall apply. So what we've done is we wanted to provide for a definition of the use, talk a little bit about the building so that when we're reviewing it, we have something almost like a purpose statement. And then we're going to walk down the road of some standards. All storage units shall gain access from the interior of the building. No door may face the street or be visible from off the property. If the facility abuts residential zone property, the facility loading bay docks and doors shall not be visible from the residential district. So in other words, there's a lot of BR district that does back up to residential zoning. So we want to ensure that if you're a resident in that district, you're not walking out your back door and finding and watching people unload their vehicle in a commercial district right across the fence. Ground floor and upper floor facades shall be designed to be compatible with adjacent development and architectural standards. So this is just, and then we're wanting to make sure that there's design elements within that. So it's not just a massive wall. I know in the illustrations that we've seen, Mr. Green's property proposed here in Marion, I think it lends well. I will say that some of those that he's illustrated look more manufacturing than they do commercial. And I would see them more apt in a manufacturing district or an industrial district. Now, that is my perception of what they look like, and he has his perception. I think that's why we have to have some general design standards and discussions as we move these projects forward. Next slide, please. And this just speaks to the issue of the building surfaces, saying that we'd want to see some architectural elements provided for. So you wouldn't want to see unfaced concrete block, painted masonry, or tip up and bare precast panels or non-architectural metal siding. So you wouldn't want to see that in the BR district. If they are provided for in the industrial district, that may not be necessarily as difficult to take. Outdoor storage shall be prohibited in the BR district. So we don't want to see lots full of vehicles behind fences in the regional business district. No building shall exceed 3 stories in heights. And buildings adjacent to residential zone property shall not exceed 2 stories. So in some of the areas, we want to ensure that the elevation of the building is not hindering the residential development that may be nearby. And then tenant access shall be restricted to the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. One of the concerns we have, and I think police and fire can speak to this issue, are access and occupancy of these units at night. And the last thing we want to do is have issues of this nature in the regional business districts adjacent to residential. And, you know, I think this is just an important point as we move forward. Next slide, please. So this is Mr. Green's site. I think you guys have seen this enough. I think this is an old rendering, so I would ask you not to really pay too close attention to this one. I think he illustrated the newest one. But, you know, from what I've seen, these facilities can look commercial. This one that we have seen certainly does, but it is in the tone of a regional business commercial district, highway commercial district, not Tower Terrace Road, not a neighborhood facility. As much as we have heard that this evening, I would contend that that's not the case. And next slide, please. And then we get into just prohibited uses. So this is just speaking to, I think, you know, we want to see residences, workshops, or such. We have contractor condos that would be a different use if that's the case. And then we certainly don't want any repair, manufacturing, obviously. And this covers both self-storage in itself, exterior or interior. So we're not suggesting that any, I know Mr. Green wouldn't do this. He's keeps a pretty clean operation, that well aware of it. Next slide. So I also just want to point out that I didn't walk through every code section that we have relative to these. There's already in existence bulk regulation, so the size of the lot, how big they can be. There's already a landscaping standard in place for most, but you've seen that applied to that Culver project or that storage facility that was proposed earlier. We've got fencing and buffer yards. We do want to make sure that we're eliminating some of the more obnoxious fencing provisions if we do get into a regional business or in the business regional business districts. We have lighting standards, signage standards, and then site standards, including access, stormwater, fire access, and code. So I think the big ones you guys wanted to hear about this evening are primarily related to the use in the district and the design of it. Next slide. So, you know, you've seen this slide in the past. So this is an inventory of existing facilities in town. The blue are the conforming districts that we have. The green are the non-conforming conforming with BR approved. My apologies. So the green ones would come into conformance with the BR being approved. And then non-conforming already would be the orange, and then the purple would be non-conforming with the zoning update. Now, in reviewing this, I think I may be incorrect on some of these items. The green would be conforming if the BR is approved and it was self-storage. So my apologies on that. This has exterior. This has the exterior access facilities identified. So I'd want to update this slide before I illustrate that again. My apologies on that. So I'll tweak that and provide another copy of to the council for that. Next, and I can move on to the next slide. So additionally, it was indicated that we would be eliminating the ability to build storage in Marion. This map illustrates the BR districts and the M1 and M2 districts in the community that are currently zoned or that would be allowed under the new zoning district classification. So there are ample opportunities in staff's mind for these facilities to be located in the community. Now, this leads me to my last slide, I believe. And that is where to allow interior self-storage. That initial slide was staff's recommendation to put it in the BR, M1, M2. You know, options can include, but are certainly not limited to, conditional use in the BR district, which means it would go to the Planning Commission for review and then ultimately the Zoning Board of Adjustment for a final review and approval. You know, from what we've seen, if we have some standards in place, staff's comfortable with it being in the regional business district. I think I've noted before, and I won't belabor the issue, but you know, I don't think there's been a severe disagreement that Mr. Green's project doesn't look good. I mean, I think we've supported the project, and the question has just been the zoning. So you know that we don't really have a major issue with it from the standpoint. So that's one question that we have. Is the council supportive of the way that we're moving forward with the ordinance? I guess I would ask that.
Any input on that question from any council members? Repeat your question, Tom.
So is the council supportive of providing for the interior self-storage in the BR district, M1 and M2, as a permitted use?
Go ahead, Steve.
This is Steve. The answer for me is yes.
Your Honor,
Yes, go ahead.
I would agree with that. My answer would be yes, with the proviso. I think we need to keep this as simple as possible and avoid conditional use situations, just because the downstream from all of that becomes more complex from a legislative and approval standpoint.
So Tom, is your question limited to indoor?
Yes.
Sure.
Indoor self-storage in the BR district.
Yeah, I would agree with Steve and Grant. Go ahead.
I would also agree. Yes, for me.
And then, is that everyone? Randy, I guess Randy.
Yes, I would say yes as well to your direct question though, Tom.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And then the next item, and this is where if there's a desire for this to change, we may need to take a little stronger look at design standards relative to exterior access self-storage. So these are the traditional self-storage facilities, the drive up that's what we have in the community right now. So staff is recommending to maintain those in the M1 and M2 districts. It does create nonconformities within the community. It will do that. There are options. They can be allowed as an accessory to any business. You can say they could be an accessory use. They could allow it as accessory to an interior storage facility in the BR. Or they could be a conditional use as permitted or accessory in the BR district. So in other words, they could be, you could say you could continue to have or apply for exterior self-storage in the BR district, but it would be a conditional use permit. Now, though, this is the area where I think if we're going to move into allowing it in the BR district, we'd want to have additional standards in place.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, Steve, I agree. I think if we have the proper standards in place, we can do exactly as Grant is proposing and getting rid of the conditional use. So I would prefer to spend the extra time on having the correct design standards to eliminate the conditional use.
So just so I'm clear, so you want additional standards to allow exterior storage in the BR?
No, interior.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not talking about exterior.
So his question now though is whether to allow exterior storage as a conditional use in the BR or as an accessory use in the BR, which I thought that's what we're trying not to do here. So I'm not for that, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question, Tom.
he's saying if
I
you
was
want to
still-
allow that, he would recommend that you have more stringent design standards.
Can you bring up the map on the BR, M1 and M2 districts?
I think it's back one, Rachel or Terrell.
We got it. So if we're talking BR,
So it's along the major corridors, the 4-lane divided portions of 151, and then Blair's Ferry Road near Timberline, Lions Lane.
you know, I could personally see some sections of BR where if we have better design standards for exterior storage, they may be appropriate as long as they're screened, you have better standards. Not all of it, but that's where, if you make it conditional, then it's got to go through P&Z. The layout, the design, and all that has to make sense. So that'd be my opinion, that it may make sense. Certain areas, no, I don't think it's good. I don't think even P&Z or we would agree to it. But if I look at where all the BR is, I could see circumstances where it may be appropriate with better design standards than the majority of the exterior self-storage is today.
Anyone else?
Your Honor, Grant here.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so Tom, on this second bullet point, critical question, staff recommendation is only an M1 and M2 district.
Yep.
And obviously, you know, the conditional use or as permitted or accessory in BR, I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on the primary recommendation, only in M1 and M2. If we enact that, do we create then any problems for existing storage units that are not in those areas? And I'm specifically asking, if we go north of 151 on 13, isn't there some self-storage north of 151 on 13 that would not be in a BR district?
That's correct.
Okay, so there's existing self-storage north of 151 on 13 that then there's some, there's a conditional use or something that has to be executed?
No, they would, so they would become legal non-conforming uses. If you recall, I gave the presentation to, you know, when we rezone property and they become, they are placed into a district where they're not provided for anymore, they would become legal non-conforming uses. So they would be grandfathered and be able to exist in that zoning district in perpetuity or until they became abandoned. And even if, or if they were destroyed by an act of God, derecho, storms, tornado, they do have the opportunity to go to the zoning board of adjustment for an exception to continue if they can provide that they are providing a good public service in there and that their existence would be in the public interest.
And in that regard, is there a level of damage percentage that they have to meet or exceed?
Yes, and that's where we have some code indiscrepancies where we've got one section says 55%, one says 65% beyond damage, and we're working towards getting that straightened out as well.
Okay, so the point of my question was really to illuminate for my council colleagues that there's some legwork to be done, as well as some thinking just about how the existing facilities in those areas would need to be handled go forward. That was really the point. I didn't want us to lose sight of that.
Absolutely. No, I've tried to be very clear about that. throughout these conversations, that there will be facilities that are established as legal non-conforming uses as a part of the rezoning.
Got it. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is to leave the exterior self-storage alone at this point. Amend the code to allow for the interior self-storage in the BR district. We can bring that forward to the Planning Commission next month and start the process. What I want to do in the interim between now and then is sit down with Mr. Green, and I think also Mr. Lucor, I believe, and speak to those two specifically, just because they've been very attentive to this issue. And so we would want to talk to them about it, and then obviously try to get some coverage of this and have a good conversation at our Planning Commission meeting next month.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this item?
Yes, Mayor, I've got a question for Tom. This is Randy.
Go ahead, Randy.
Thank you. Tom, so I'm sorry, these have gone back and forth so many times that I think it's a little gray here. So we're basically saying that we're now moving to the point of allowing these to go in with a conditional use or a non-conditional use.
So the interior self-storage, as I'm recommending, and I think this so far has been supported, we would allow the interior self-storage facilities to be located in the BR district as a permitted use.
So that could be reconstructed. If need be, it could be reconstructed or sold for same as. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
So Tom, does that, in the BR district, would they still be subject to any kind of design standards?
Yes, that would be established in the ordinance. So the standards that I read just a bit ago, those would be the premise behind them. Yes. I didn't draft the entire ordinance down, to the specificity. I wanted to get some direction from council before I jumped into that situation.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Item number 2.
Yes, Your Honor. So as I believe I presented a similar situation at the last council meeting, we are issuing a floodplain permit from the city of Marion to the city of Marion. I am the floodplain manager as the city engineer, how the ordinance is written today. So as the 10th Avenue Side Path project, we are impeding the floodway both by the 44th Street and the 50th Street culverts. And so we have to issue ourselves a permit. So this is just a matter of putting it on record.
Okay, any questions?
Your Honor, just a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, in the letter we received, and it's in the packet from the Corps of Engineers, I was somewhat entertained with their assessment that it'll impact 0.054 acres of wetland. I did a conversion on that, and that's in round numbers, 2,400 square feet, just as a point of emphasis.
Thanks for that. Okay, anything else on that item? It's going to be great to have those side paths. It's going to change the whole look of that area. Anything else on that item? Okay, and that brings us to the conclusion of the meeting. Meeting's adjourned. We will see you on Thursday. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, all.